everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. This episode of the show is being sponsored by the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. I've worked at the temple for about the past decade now, and I can really attest to the quality of the work that they do. Predominantly, they're working with the plant medicine Ayahuasca, working in a lineage of the Shipibo people, which is a group of people who have a very long lineage of working with these plants. They're located in the Peruvian Amazon outside the city of Iquitos, and they offer 12-day workshops, working with 6 ceremonies, 4 different healers or doctors, curanderos, I believe 3 different facilitators now. They have an amazing support staff working with yoga teachers, massage therapists, bone doctors, an amazing integration staff. So it's a really an amazing place to go and to experience this work and to go really deeply into the healing, the learning benefits that these plants, not just ayahuasca, but really working within a whole pharmacopoeia of different plant medicine have to offer. So if you'd like more information about them, you can check out their website at templeofthewayoflight.org, and they are up and running again after a very long hiatus due to the pandemic. They're open again and receiving guests. Also, myself and my colleague, Marav Artsy, who I interviewed, I believe, in episode 28 of the show, are continuing to run diets. Our next one is coming up very soon in the Sacred Valley, the entire month of September. And that's a really beautiful opportunity to go deep into the world of plant medicine, going into a period of isolation, fasting, and working with one plant to really experience all of the healing, the learning, the teaching that these plants have to offer. We work mainly within a tradition that we were trained in, but also combining different modalities. Also, my guest for today was trained in a similar lineage. And so that's a really beautiful opportunity to do this work or to continue to do this work if it's something you've done before. For more information about that, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org and also Marav's site at tobaccodiets.com. My guest for today is my friend Ben. We, as I said, did a very similar training. He's a very fascinating guy. We've been connecting more kind of via online, share a lot of similar interests and passions, and he's a really fascinating guy, really interesting story. He's studied different shamanic traditions from all over the world. He also has a background in martial arts, traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, working with tobacco, ayahuasca, just a lot of different plants and modalities. And we got into a really deep conversation. It went, I think, 3.5 hours. We touched on all sorts of different topics, on different shamanic traditions and paths, on tobacco, ayahuasca, plant medicine. We also got into the current world situation a bit. So for me, it was a really interesting conversation. I knew we'd have a really interesting conversation because he is a very interesting and complex guy. So I think and hope you guys will get a lot out of this episode. We covered a real breadth of different topics, and I think there's a lot to learn from this one. So as always, if you're able to support the podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. For as little as $1 a month, you can sign up. There's different tiers you can sign up for. It's also working with this idea of reciprocity. So by giving, you also get some things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As, and that's a really big help to me to continue to be able to make these podcasts, to bring on these guests. To all the people who have done that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And if you are able to do that, thank you in advance. There's also the option of direct donating via PayPal. I'll put a link to those in the show notes. Now with YouTube, there's also the option to join the channel and receive a lot of the same perks as Patreon, but doing it via YouTube. If you're not able to do that, simply subscribing to the show is a really big help on the YouTube channel, subscribing to the show, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. That's a really big help with the algorithms to get this show out to a bigger audience. With the audio version, still the biggest one is Apple Podcasts. Also following or subscribing to the show and leaving a starred rating and a short review. That's also a really big help. So I think that's it. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Ben.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
So it's official now.
Official, here we are.
Well, cool, brother. It's good to see you. We were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and we were just sharing. We have some mutual friends. We've been on a very similar journey. I know of you through my colleague Marav, who I do a lot of work with, and she spoke very highly of you. I think, as you said, we had met very briefly, but somehow our paths never really crossed in that crazy Mecca, which is called Iquitos.
Mecca / Heart of Darkness, depending on who you speak to. Yeah, I think so.
So maybe to get started, maybe just telling the audience a bit about your background, who you are, where you came from, and kind of the journey that led you to do the work you're doing.
Yeah, cool. So, thanks for having me on. By the way, it's a great podcast. Like, I was really figured somebody needs to do something like this, and especially as you have Indigenous healers on, I think that's so important, to give them a voice. It's fantastic, and some of those podcasts are just incredible. So people need to go back and listen. But my story is a fairly long one, and we were speaking before that we've got time, so that's good. But so I'm going to slowly walk through this, and as I was saying to you before, I'd really like to tell this story not to sort of fantasize or to sort of create some amazing image of myself, but to really show people that there's this amazing magic in the world, and sort of give people some inspiration. I think your video is frozen again, just to let you know.
Okay.
But so and in this story, I think I've never really told it before, because I think some of the elements sound a bit far-fetched. So I'm telling this really for the first time. So if people could just have an open mind and an open heart when listening to this story, and just you don't have to believe it. You just maybe take the lessons from it, or take from it what you will. So from a young age, I guess I had lots of different experiences. That was lots of incredible dreams. I would go to sleep at night and see kind of a neon tunnel, which I'd kind of fly down and have these incredible lucid dreams. So I'd always been into spiritual things and spiritual life. I think your videos again. It's all right. And I'd also been into martial arts as well for a long time. So I did judo from a young age. Anyway, sort of in my 20s, I was practicing in kickboxing, and I had a fight coming up, which is quite an antithesis to sort of healing work. But there we are, and was sort of directionless at that time. So I decided that I would take a trip to Thailand, and went to Thailand, did some training in the Thai boxing camp, which essentially entails you getting beaten up every day, training 6 hours a day. And I stumbled upon this small bookshop, and just kind of as happens, many people speak about this, books just kind of fly off shelves and into your hand, and this kind of was one of those moments. And it was a book about Chinese medicine and Chinese healing modalities. And I was just scouring this book. Wow, this is incredible. And, really gave me an inspiration. I was like, right, when I go back, I'm going to study to be an acupuncturist. So that's what I did. 4 years later, I became an acupuncturist, and that got me more and more interested into Chinese medicine, Chinese philosophy, Chinese martial arts. So I really delved deep into that, and actually ultimately went to studying Chinese at university for 4 years, speaking fluent Chinese and living in China, and actually ended up going to China sort of six or so times. And one thing I did when I went to university was drink ayahuasca by myself, which I never recommend anyone to do. And maybe we could get into later why you should never do that and why you should do as I say and not as I do. But it remains to this day one of the most profound experiences with ayahuasca that I had. I sort of completely disconnected from my body and entered another realm in a way that I completely forgot myself, and came through a series of trials to a kind of very center place where in essence it was like a conversation with ayahuasca itself, which presented as a incredible neon multi-jeweled vine which kind of opened up in front of me. And in this center place, it allowed me to ask questions. So I asked 2 questions. I was interested in this meditation teacher that I'd seen on a video in Java. I was inspired to go and see him. So I asked the question, should I or could I go and see this man, and will I find him? And the answer was yes, you will find him. But it's a very difficult path. And the other question was, how do we navigate death? And the answer to that was, you need to be able to dream. You need to be able to stay conscious in your dreams. So with that, I booked a flight to Java. I thought, okay, let's just try this out. It was more of an experimentation. I wanted to see if this intuition led anywhere. And I think you'll see in the story that, this story is about a path being led by intuition. I think that's really important for people to do, whatever that intuition is, whether that's to be a plumber or carpenter or a writer, or whatever that is. It kind of leads you along the way. So anyway, I followed this vision, this intuition to Java, and I ended up, didn't know where this guy was, but I had this intuition to go to this one particular city of millions upon millions of people. And I spoke some Chinese by that point, so I thought I would go to the Chinatown. And many years earlier, I'd studied with a Taoist monk in China who taught me this meditation on the heart. It was a kind of a grueling meditation. I would experience a lot of heat with it, and that would stay with me. And I would go out even in cold winter's days and still be hot. I mean, I would be out in shorts in the snow. It was crazy. So it was very kind of physically grueling. But anyway, it left me with some kind of intuition associated with the heart. So anyway, I'm arrived into this Chinatown, and first day there, and I'm just walking along the street, and I'm kind of feeling into myself, into this place in my heart, and I'm sort of, there's all these rows of street sellers, and I'm walking along. I got to the last street seller on the row, and suddenly my heart just kind of opened up, and I said, okay, this is the place. I just sat down, ate some food, and this guy come up, started talking to me, and quite friendly, and I started talking to the people who sell the food, and we became friendly, and they said, oh, come with us to the mall tomorrow, and we'll show you around. I'm like, awesome. So I went to bed, woke up the next day. Not really a morning person anyway, and obviously with the jet lag, I woke up late and started scurrying to the mall, and I couldn't see them where we said they would meet. So I was just wandering around, and then I hear Ben. It was actually the first guy I met. This guy wasn't associated with the stall, but was friends with these people. I sat down with him and I started talking. And he was like, "Why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea?" And I was talking to him, and he started talking about his father for no real reason. And he started talking about his father had this meditation teacher. And something about what he said pinged me, and I was like, his father is being taught by the guy that I'm taught. So I thought, wow, incredible. So I tried my best to organize a meeting with his father, and it didn't happen for 3 or 4 weeks. It didn't happen for ages until the very last day that I was there in Java. And I remember it was like something from a kung fu movie. He was like a rich merchant. So I remember going up the father's steps. It was kind of, this huge Guan Yu statue. I don't know if you've seen these, but obviously associated with Chinese business. And I'm going up the stairs, and there's like gold lacquer on the doors and marble everywhere, like very opulent. And I go into this huge, like, darkened room with dragons everywhere and this huge, like, open table. And the guy sat opposite me, and he was also a fortune teller, apparently. And he said, "Look, I can't give you the teacher's details, because if I do, I'm going to get kicked out of the school. Like, it's very secret, as it were, sort of hush hush." And he said, "I can only give you these details if you have Mingyun, and Mingyun is like your fate, your destiny." I said in Chinese, like, if I'm here because of destiny. It's like, otherwise I wouldn't be here right now. And so he kind of thought for a second and wrote out this name on a piece of paper and pushed it across the table and gave it to me. And so I did end up going to see him and learning some things, but that's really another story. But it kind of, that incident kind of really opened up my mind to the faculty of intuition, and, this kind of awakening to a different aspect of reality that was being tapped into in that moment. And in many times in my life throughout this kind of medicine journey, there's been times where it's kind of thrown me, and it takes several months to kind of you recalibrate to your new version of reality, which you never had before, and that's somewhat traumatic. So and through this experience, I think I started to have questions about reality. And that's like, well, maybe the things that I've been told about the way the world works are not really the way the world works, and maybe there's other ways that the world works that are worth exploring. And I was always interested in shamanism, and in one particular shaman that I've heard about in many stories that I kept coming across. He's long since passed, but I've heard of kind of apprentices that worked with him. So so my next mission was to go to Peru to find an apprentice of this shaman I work with. Your camera's stuck again. So I did some research and found this girl who actually lived. She worked with this man who apprenticed with this shaman. I'm not going to say any names because I don't want to. And she so happened to live one tube stop from me, and was doing like an art exhibition kind of that following week. So I was like, okay. So I organized to meet with her for a cup of tea, and she very kindly gave me the address of the shaman that she works with. Just gonna move my laptop over a little bit in case it is my internet that's going on. And so I had this address, and I boarded the plane to Peru. I got a lancha from Pucallpa to Iquitos, and actually stopped at a small village kind of in between at this shaman's village by speedboat. So dropped off from the lancha's like just a little, like a cargo boat where you usually have to wait about 3 or 4 days for it to cast off while it's got the cargo. And, it's very slow, and rubbish food and all that stuff. And interesting stories can be told from those lanchas. But anyway, so yeah, I was dropped off by speedboat on the banks of the Amazon, with my rucksack, and thinking, as I always did in all these trips, I think, what the hell are you doing? Like, this is ridiculous. This is just stupid. And so I'm at the banks of the Amazon and asking around for the shaman. And there are a few Westerners, and one of which actually was Joey, who's had you on this podcast before. So he's a beloved friend. So he's one of the first people I actually met in Peru on my journey. Anyway, so I started working with this particular shaman. And, he remains probably one of the most powerful shamans I ever worked with. But as I always say, you don't always want to look for the most powerful shaman. That's not always the that's not always the best way to go. So I started, and I would also work with another shaman who was part of this mesa. So, you know, an associated mesa, you know, it's like translates as table really, but it's the group of shamans that, you know, work together as one group. And they often give themselves like military titles like El Capitan and different, you know, titles within that. So that's quite interesting. So I'd worked with this other shaman as well alongside, and in one of the ceremonies, I had this very strong vision and of these little people with huge eyes, and I'm sure many people have seen these little people associated with the trees, and they would, as soon as I drank the cup, instantaneously they just jumped all over me and were trying to drag me somewhere else. And I was very new to this. Sort of, no, stop. And they just dragged me off. And I remember being pulled underneath this huge tree and just feeling like a newborn babe, like a newborn lamb underneath this tree, completely protected. And they said to me, if you're ever in danger, just call on us and come back to this tree, and you'll be safe. And then I would have these dreams about the shaman I was working with, this powerful shaman, that he was in danger, that he was going to be attacked. And I remember thinking, that's ridiculous. Like, that must be your imagination. Stop making up fantasies. And I would try and get it out of my head, but these visions and dreams were extremely strong. And then I remember one night, and look, I'm just going to be honest in this conversation. It's, you know, it's a difficult conversation to talk about because it's not talked about very much, but I'm just going to be open about it. There's a good side to shamanism, but there's a negative side. Let's just call it what it is, because, you know, I think we often get waylaid in the West by our own imposing of our own archetypes, whether they come from like Hindu culture of kind of, you know, the yogi who's spiritual and aspirational, or the priest, you know. But shamans are not that. Shamans are just people who work with the spirit world, just like a doctor works with medicine. And, you know, and you get some like wonderful, amazing, beautiful shamans and doctors and carpenters, and you get some who are not, you know, you wouldn't want to have a cup of tea with. And that's just the way it is. And so, you know, if we can get rid of that naivety, I think we're in a much safer place. And I think so that's important for people to know. And so I think it's important for people to know the breadth of what shamanism entails. But anyway, and I'm going to talk about, you know, wonderful aspects as well. But anyway, so I was in this one particular ceremony, he was in fact attacked. And it was was scary for him. I could perceive a lot of fear coming from him, and I was in this bubble, like I was told. I was sort of beneath this tree, completely protected, and every now and again I could kind of perceive outside this bubble, and just experience this pure darkness. And they said to me that just don't go there, just sit where you are. You're in the right place. Just sit underneath your tree and just be protected. So, I mean, that kind of rattled me to some extent, because you've got this shaman, you know, the big bad shaman, the powerful shaman who could defeat anything, and yet here he was kind of leveled, really leveled, and I could see that he was scared. And I saw in those moments the gravity of being a curandero or being a shaman in his position. And it was not a fun job, you know. It's I think a lot of people aspire to that maybe, or have, you know, ideas about that, but the reality is very different. And so yeah, I never kind of wanted to follow that path. I was, well, this is definitely not for me. This is just terrifying. And so soon after that, like, I left, you know, a little shaken up, and I went to see a few other shamans and kind of worked around Peru. I did a lot of diets and working, and somewhere along the way, I stumbled upon somebody who really was not good. Like, this guy was good, but this person was really not good, and left me with something in a ceremony, which took me a long time to sort of unravel exactly what happened to me. It was only till many years later that I had a vision of exactly what happened to me, which was, you know, not to go into too much detail about it, but it was sort of a curse on my heart. And throughout this story, you'll hear a lot about the heart. I think the heart is a very incredible, mystical organ, and there's no coincidence that every religion, every spiritual tradition, every indigenous tradition talks about the heart as being a housing place for the spirit. And so, you know, I had many symptoms of this curse, which again, you know, I could maybe go into later, but essentially I knew something was deeply wrong. You know, things were going wrong in my life. I was having terrible dreams. My health was terrible. You just know. And it sent me on a journey through, you know, many visions of working with different healers around the world, doing diets. I did a lot of diets with British trees for many years. It took me on a journey all around the world, to Colombia, to Namibia, to Australia, working with Aboriginal healers, to every single habitable continent around the world, trying to find healing and following visions that were kind of laid out for me. It was a very relentless time in my life, and, you know, I'd spend months in very remote parts of the world working with different healers, and I feel so blessed to have experienced all this. And you know, it was really me. It wasn't like it was sorry, Jason, I don't mean to keep going about your camera.
Yeah, I guess maybe just for the audience, we're having a small, seems technical issue with the camera. But, the audio is fine. Yeah, I can hear you and everything. But if anyone's listening just on the audio version, that's what we're talking about. But
So I don't know if the audience has a frozen Jason, but I have a frozen Jason sometimes, and I like to see him move with his mouth. So, so anyway, so it wasn't like this was a path of curiosity. It was, you know, there was some element of that, but it was a path of being dragged, kicking and screaming, to different places and different healers. And actually, the times when it was, I know it was pure interest, or pure like, oh, let's just see what this is about. You know, I went one time to. This is a lesson for people. You have to follow your intuition. I went to kind of a shaman festival in Hungary, and I remember the shamans kind of beating their drum, going through the ceremony, and I started to feel really odd. I was like, oh, this isn't right. I just started to feel really odd. And so I just left, and I was really drawn to this one direction. I don't know why, but I was just drawn. And as I was walking away, I slipped down this crevice, this hill, and I fell down about 20 feet, dislocated my shoulder. I mean, I say dislocated, I mean, I ripped my arm out of the socket. I mean, it was very, very severe. To this day, it ails me. And instantly the message was, stop, don't go looking. Like, you need to follow, don't look. So I was like, okay. So that was a very clear message right there. And each you know, each one of those journeys, when in Australia, Colombia, Namibia, America, wherever, is a whole podcast in itself, really. And so, but I'd really like to touch on, you know, one particular journey which has really touched me, which is my journey to Namibia. It was really close to my heart because it's one of the most powerful experiences I had in my life, which is so again, following a vision. I had visions of the Bushmen. Actually, this vision of, it was a vision of me turning into a lion and feeling the strength of this lion, this raw, incredible power, and then opening my eyes to seeing around me these men dancing. They were carrying poles and sticks and dancing around this fire. And somewhere along the dance, this man came up to me and stabbed me in the heart. And it really rattled me, that vision. And it just, yeah, I just knew that I had to go and find these people wherever they were. And I researched, and the closest people I could find was the Bushmen. And so I was emailing this chap, this guy who was what I now consider to be the world's expert on the Bushmen, and an anthropologist, and emailing him about the Bushmen, like, oh, where can I learn the language, or do you know, where can I find more? And you know, he was kind of dismissive a little, you know, but I just had this voice in the back of my head, just keep messaging him. It must be the 10th or 20th message, really annoying this guy. And I just said, be honest, just be honest with him. So I said, look, I'm an acupuncturist. I'm really interested in the healing modality of the Bushmen, otherwise known as the San or the Jun Hawasi. And, you know, I wanted to learn more and perhaps go out there. He said, well, Ben, that's funny you should say that, because I've always wanted to take a small group of doctors or acupuncturists. Turns out he was an acupuncturist, to Namibia and go on an expedition together. How do you fancy it in the next couple of months? I was like, yes, definitely. Sounds fantastic. I didn't have any money at the time, literally no money. And I don't recommend anyone doing this, but just the very next day, it flashed up on my phone. I don't know when I signed up for this, but it was like medical trials. and I would never normally do something like this, but the medical trial payment was exactly the same amount of money that I needed to go on this trip. So I was like, well, I got to do it then. So I did this, you know, I sort of sat in a hospital bed for 3 weeks and took unknown substances in my body, and then went off to Namibia. And I mean, an incredible place and environment, very remote, you know, giraffes and lions and roaming free just by the side of the road. I mean, it's an incredible blast of nature. Incredibly difficult environment as well. But anyway, so it's with this group, and we went to many different healers. You know, we were going around watching and experiencing the dance, which the Bushmen participate in, which I'll talk more about. But this is their kind of healing dance, which you know, some say it's very old, some say it's very new, but is very sacred. And they have two main forms of dances: the elephant dance and the giraffe dance. Some people say the elephant dance is a newer creation from Angola. Lots of healers told me this. And there's the giraffe dance, which to me seemed more traditional. So we were going around some of the elephant healers, and to me, not to slight them, but just for me, they seem very theatrical. There's a lot of theatrical elements to their dances, and I couldn't really connect with what they were doing. But somewhere along the way, we experienced one particular healer, whose name Kuntabo, and I remember seeing him do his healings, and just the power that he put into these healings was incredible. You know, sweat would just be dripping off from him. And I remember he didn't do any healing work on any of us. And I remember the person I was with asked him, you know, why didn't you do any healing work for us? And he said, because I looked at you and didn't need it. And I thought, wow, that's an incredible amount of integrity. You know? So I stayed with the group for a couple more weeks and went to a few more places. And I remember speaking to the anthropologist and saying, I'm thinking of staying on my own and going to see Kuntabo. And he's like, yeah, I think I was going to say that to you. I think that's a great idea. So I said goodbye to everybody else, and I left and found somebody who was willing to take me to Kuntabo's village. So at that time, you couldn't get there by jeep. It was like rainy season. So there was kind of knee-high water for about 4.5 hours walking through the undergrowth in Namibia to get to this village, literally seeing like snakes going around the water, and it felt like quite the adventure. It's it's strangely nice to have this warm water like lapping around your legs as you're walking through it. So end up in this village, and Kuntabo was incredibly generous and open with me, and we organized the dance. And so what they do in the dance is they tie it's silkworm cocoons filled with pieces of ostrich shell tied around their legs as a kind of rattle. So when they dance, it makes this kind of sound like shit, 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 shit. And the idea of the dance is that first off, the women kind of sit in the middle around the fire, and they are clapping and they're singing in these staccato rhythms. If you've ever heard Reciprocity, that's the most incredible thing. And that kind of coincides with, there are women healers, but they're much less. And the women healers usually work with the women healers, and the men usually work with the men healers. So this was purely the men who were healing at this point. But the women and children and young boys, they sit and they sing in the middle, and then the dancers will dance around the outside, sort of shuffling their feet one after the other through the dirt around the dance. And the idea is that what has been passed down from healer to healer, from time immemorial, from the animals and from God, is this spiritual substance called Nam, which sits in something called the Gabezi, which is the stomach area. And I don't like to, cross compare with, Kundalini, the Dantian, the chakras, anything like that, because I think it's different. I think we owe respect to just take their word for what they're talking about. And what they're talking about is not ecstatic dance. It's not, whatever word you want to put it, it's their own form of dance, which is theirs and theirs alone. And they, for them, it's this Nam, and this Nam comes from the animals and it comes from God. And so, that's what I believe. And so as they dance, this Nam, it heats up in their body, and it causes them to go into a very strong trance. And through this trance, they're able to see, they're able to heal, and they're able to work with people. So no substances are partaken, nothing like that. It's purely from this essence they're given by other healers. And they're often afraid, actually. You might hear me talking about the New Age a little bit in this podcast. And not to bash anyone, but I just want to make a distinction that traditional shamanism is something that is very different to what you will learn in a so-called drumming workshop or this or that. It's not the same thing. It's just not. And, you know, I'm not saying that those things are bad, but don't pretend that they're the same thing as what these people are doing and what other shamans around are doing, because it's not. I just unequivocally, it's not. And they're very afraid of this trance because it's very painful for them. Speaking to them, they describe it as kind of nails or spikes going up their spine. You know, you'll see healers screaming and running into the undergrowth to avoid the pain that this trance brings on. So it's no joke, you know. Anyway, so I'm I'm dancing, and I'm kind of dancing with Kunstberg. He's kind of pushing me, and he's kind of touching me, and the idea is to try and put this numb inside my body. So I'm dancing around, and I don't really feel anything. And I just said to myself, it doesn't matter. Just, you know, how incredible. You were in the open, the stars were just incredible. It was like, you know, the filament just above the earth. It was just incredible. And I just kind of gave up. I just thought, just enjoy it rather than holding on to anything. And you know, I think that's a common theme as well. It's like things come to us when we just give up. You know, trying never works with this path. You just have to give up. And so trying to think of which elements I can and cannot talk about this. But essentially the dance stopped. I was a bit confused as to why, but the dance stopped, and I was walking with a boy from the village who spoke good English, and I went with him to my tent, and I looked across from my tent and I could see I could see all these fireflies, these hundreds of red fireflies. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. It's like, do you see that? That's amazing, isn't it? He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, look, these red fireflies. And he's like, no, I don't see anything. I'm like, what are you talking about? Right there. No. I'm like, that's interesting. I didn't feel anything, but I just felt hot. I just felt really hot in my body, but I'm in Namibia. I'm dancing around a fire. I thought that would be quite normal. And I go to the left of my tent. And then a sort of wind blew towards me. And in that wind was this neon blue light with two eyes. And I don't want to talk about what the spirit was. I want to save some element for myself because it's such a sacred story for me. But this was a spirit of nature and something so palpable in a way that I've never experienced before or since. I mean, it wasn't, you know, people can dismiss things as a figment of imagination or you partaking in something as a hallucination. But this was a so grounded interaction with a spirit of nature that was right there in front of me as I'm seeing you here now in full neon regalia, interacting with me and communicating with me. And sorry, it's a quite a hard story to tell, but as you can see, because it's I just had in that moment a realization of, and it came instantly, of how far we've come from our rightful place in nature and our rightful interaction with nature, and how so many things, whether that's society, the food you eat, the environment you're in, the thoughts you tell yourself, the dogmas that you have, the ideologies that you hold, the sickness in your heart, whatever, has removed our connection with this magical, mystical, elegant, majestic aspect of nature. And we've reduced nature to this formula, to an algorithm, an equation, and it's not. It's magic. It has spirit, and, you know, in a way that I'd never experienced so direct before, that showed me that. And so I woke up in the morning the next day, and just feeling like a little bit coy, like, am I gone mad? Like, what the hell? This was such an incredible experience. And Kuntabo was south side with the whole village, as happened every single day, drinking a cup of tea and smoking a cigarette, and asked me, so what did you experience last night? And I told him exactly what I experienced, and he said yes, like, wow, like, I wondered if you'd experienced something. You know, you're like us. You experienced the of the animal and the wind of the animal, and you know, this is what we experience. And I was just, you know, blown away. So yeah, you know, had an opportunity to work with Bo, you know, several more occasions, but you know, unfortunately, he passed away this year, and so you know, if I have any vision for the future, I guess it would be to go and see his wife. And I was told this story about how he used to always tell a story about how he was given meat by an explorer back in the day, and he would always, you know, marvel about this meat. So I'd like to go and bring his wife some meat if she's still alive, sort of, you know, complete that circle for those gifts that, you know, he's given with me, and to sort of respect his life, because you know, talking about shamans, lost a lot of mentors this year. It's been a really hard year in that respect, and these people, I regard them, you know, the people like Kuntabo and other healers, which I'm sure you know and I know, are these special kind of healers that work with medicine, and medicine being the you know, this majestic, beautiful, flourishing aspect of nature and God's love is how I would describe it, and the spirits that are associated with that. You know, these shamans and healers are the last light bearers of that aspect of nature. They need to be preserved and cherished and nourished and supported. You know, so yes, and then, you know, backtracking a bit, obviously, well, actually, I was going to talk about my time with an essay, but I think, you know, I just pause there for a moment, just ask if you've got any questions. Yeah.
That was amazing. Thank you for sharing all that. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
I think we may be going on one of the longer episodes of this.
I don't even know what the time is, but sorry if I'm dragging on or being boring.
No, that was amazing. I guess just to, I definitely love to get to Ernesto too, and there's just so much there I'd love to get into. Maybe going back to the beginning, you mentioned that one of the things that really started you on this journey was you were a trained acupuncturist. You were interested in traditional Chinese medicine, things like martial arts. Why do you have this? Because you said something really interesting that was very similar to my path, and
oh, nice.
Kind of these serendipitous things. Like you mentioned, this book came to you, and for me, it was a very similar thing. It was because I remember it very specifically. I was 16 years old, and I went to the local bookstore to get a present for my mother, because that was like the first time I could like go on my own to do something. And, you know, always before it was, I had to go with a parent to buy something. And so it was the first time I'd been to this bookstore, and I just kind of, I went to the discount book, you know, table, because at 16, you don't have a lot of money. And I found this, you know, this really beautiful book on interior design or something. And I was like, oh, this will be perfect for my mother. And right next to it was this little tiny book. And I don't know why, but it just, something about it drew me to it. And it was called the Tao Te Ching. And I picked it up, and it was the first time in my life where I felt something very visceral and very different. I had never felt that before. And it was in this simplicity. And it was the first time where I had read something and thought to myself, this is truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't understand how, because the words were so simple. Like, it seemed so obvious. It seemed so clear to me. And yet there was this very deep resonation. And I really think that's probably what started me on this whole journey was this little book that I picked up, and still to this day, I keep a copy of it next to my bed, because probably of all the books I've read, it's still to me the most profound.
Absolutely.
But so, kind of like you were mentioning, these books came to you, and you got really interested in acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine. What was that experience like of working with acupuncture? You also mentioned martial arts, which have been a big part of my life, and I think that's something that a lot of people maybe don't understand. I mean, for me, often practicing martial arts, fighting, competing, there's a tremendous spiritual aspect to that. I mean, I remember,
Yeah.
fighting Muay Thai in Thailand, and the music, and
Hey.
entering this trance state, and
Yeah, absolutely.
it almost seemed like a dream. But
Yeah.
what was that like for you? What was the draw to that, and what do you think you began to learn from those practices?
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. First of all, the Tao Te Ching, if anyone's never read it, then go out and read it. A particularly accessible copy is a translation by Stephen Mitchell,
Mm-hmm.
which is just a beautiful, really accessible version. Yeah, I mean, that's like a foundational text of, like a whole religion, maybe even a whole civilization. It's, what became Taoism as we know it today started from that book. I particularly became interested in lots of Taoist philosophy and practices through my work as well, most namely, meditation. But yeah, in terms of the martial arts, yeah, it's an interesting one, because you have this aspect of violence, so it seems unpeaceful, but it's refined in a way that has rules often, or rules of engagement, or rules of honor, that kind of confine that violence to a particular area. And I think it harnesses very deep aspects of ourselves, very old aspects of ourselves. We are essentially animals, and so we're harnessing that kind of those fight or flight energies in a more constructive way by harnessing our body and strengthening our mind. And yeah, often these martial arts, even Thai boxing, which is essentially a pro sport with gambling and lots of money behind it, has a spiritual aspect to it, a mental aspect to it, of prayer and the Mongkon and the tattoos and the protections and all these things that go alongside it. So I think martial arts has always gone hand in hand with spirituality for whatever reason. But for me, the real draw of something like Thai boxing or martial arts is that I think in our day-to-day existence, it's very easy to slide into passivity, and very easy to let kind of what life wash over you, or drift through life like a leaf, whereas the martial arts is extremely intentional. So if you're using it as like an analogy to life, you're breaking through barriers, you're deflecting or maneuvering around challenges, you are overcoming obstacles, and those things you're going to have to do in your life over and over and over again if you want a fulfilling life. And it's also an antithesis to that kind of sit on the couch and watch Netflix, which I've definitely been in phases of my life where I've been there. But, it's an antithesis to that. It's drawing on every single aspect of your energy, your being, your spirit, everything. And even, I like watching boxing, I'll admit it. I like watching MMA, I'll admit it. And I understand dichotomy there, because it's extremely violent sometimes. But if I watch it from, as a martial arts perspective, from the artistic perspective, the sporting aspect, the mental aspect, and there is no other sport, no other form of competition which even comes close to this like roundedness of aspects. You might have, say, speed in running, or you might have endurance in a long distance run, or you might have quick reflexes in a ping pong game. but never do you need all those elements in order to compete in the fighting sports. You need a strong mind, you need a strong body, you need to be fast, you need to be strong. It's every single element combined. So it's the most fundamental form of competition that we have. So the most primal, and it's a way that we can kind of overcome those and harness those primal tendencies in a more positive way, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's also, you mentioned this very common motif that I've experienced with all shamanic traditions, which is this idea of death. That really, through death, there can be this experience of rebirth. And so there tends to be this very high emphasis on death. And something with martial arts is, as you were saying, that's kind of the closest one can get in a controlled way to experiencing death. I mean, when you're fighting someone, if there's not a referee there in that controlled environment, the outcome of that is death. So we end up getting very close to that point potentially. And I think in that there's a very religious aspect. You also mentioned, and this really interesting idea, and I don't know if this is completely true, but you're mentioning like when you were in Namibia, that it was a very difficult environment. And I think similarly, like in the jungles of the Amazon, I spent some time like in the taiga of Mongolia, and it's a very, very
harsh.
I mean, harsh. That was the word I was going to use. And I don't mean to use it in like a negative way. It's just, it's a very visceral feeling. I remember standing on top of this mountain range and just looking out, and as far as I could see were just these barren mountains. I was staying with these people called the reindeer people. And it was the first time in my life where I just realized like the power of nature and just the smallness of me in that moment. A storm could come through and just completely decimate me, and I would have no answer to that whatsoever. So do you think there's like a correlation between that harshness? I mean, also in that martial arts, you mentioned this primal aspect, that a lot of these like shamanic traditions were maybe born out of like this harshness or this reverence of the environment they were in, trying to somehow navigate that, or even just the inherent respect that being in an environment like that brings out of someone.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I mean, again, we have these ideas, but perhaps some people have ideas of shamans being, like spiritual teachers that are there purely for you to be your higher self. That's not what they were there for traditionally. More often than not, shaman's role is, one that is a healer, one that is a curser, one that is able to speak to the elements and, look for game, bring luck in hunting. It was very down to earth and grounded. It's not anything. The healers I've met all around the world, they're completely grounded. They don't usually have this kind of spiritual aspiration, this idea of spiritual perfection, nothing like that. They are here for survival. They are here to help their tribe survive. They help their tribe flourish, to help, and one other aspect you see a lot is to bring about social cohesion. So mending those connections with nature, mending those connections with other people. Maybe that's through, jealousy and envy with other people, those connections with others. So yeah, I think, and these forms of shamanism are founded in the harshest of environments, and you don't waste your energy on doing these things unless they're for survival purposes. There's no point. That social cohesion aspect is really interesting as well. Just thinking about it, because again, that's something I've seen, especially with the Bushmen. If anyone had a problem, literally the whole tribe would sit around and just argue it out, and often that was quite ugly. there would people be screaming and shouting, and it was quite scary as an outsider. But you realize that, oh, no, what they're actually doing is listening. They're listening to every person's point of view and taking it on board. And they're only moving forward with their course of action if everybody is happy in their own little way and has formed their own, they're at peace with the decision that the tribe is making. There is no grand leader who's going to lead. There's usually a person who's like, semi-considered wise, but he's not really the leader. He's just somebody who tries to manage and tries to bring everyone together to form that common goal. And that's something, that I've also learned through my travels, that we're really missing in Western culture. We're doing completely opposite. We're not listening to anybody. In fact, we are suppressing so many voices, and that's so dangerous what we're doing, to suppress people's voices and dismiss people and label them and dehumanize them. It's horrible. So in that way, we were certainly losing our way, I think.
Yeah, I think that's something we'll get to maybe a little bit deeper in the podcast. You also mentioned this interesting idea of this when you were with the Bushmen, these two different types of dances, and one of them you mentioned, I think it was the elephant dance, being very theatrical, and that's often that can often be a really common archetype in a lot of these shamanic practices too, is this aspect of theater. I was watching a documentary recently on in the Hunza Valley of Pakistan, and this guy going into a trance and basically trying to heal this man through this trance, but it was very theatrical. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked as just nonsense. And then on the other hand, it can maybe be given too much credit, as if the theatrical dance is everything. What do you, from your experience, where do you see that fits into many of these paths?
Yeah, fascinating question. It's something I kind of wrestled with. I think there's numerous aspects to it. I mean, look, there's many layers. Like, on one level, there are charlatans even in indigenous cultures. There's people who claim to be shamans, but they're not. Okay, so we can look at it from that aspect. That's a possibility. Another possibility is that what the shamans are doing is demonstrating to you, the audience / the participants / the patients, what they're actually doing and seeing in ceremony in a way that you'll understand through their theatrics, right? So it's like a layer upon what they're actually experiencing, and they're showing it to you because they're not actually participating. They're not experiencing, say, visions. They're not experiencing what the shaman is seeing. So the shaman needs to be able to convey that in a way that the audience will understand it in a visceral way and take on board and believe. And this idea of belief, we can look at it as like purely a placebo effect, or we can look at it, which I think is more fitting, is that, this form of healing is much more effective when somebody's heart is open to that form of healing. If we look at it from a purely shamanic perspective. And then, I think, so for instance, the Bushmen, they would do things like, they would have this clay substance, and then they would roll it up into like a needle shape. They would run up to you and say, grab something out, and then show you the little clay that they'd fashioned into a needle and show you. Now, is that them saying that they've taken that clay out of your body, or pretending or tricking you into believing that you've taken it out of your body as some parlor trick? Or is it them giving a representation of what they perceive that they've taken out of your body, and that, the perhaps patients wouldn't be happy unless they saw a physical representation of what's being removed? So it can be any one of those, but it is a mysterious aspect to it. And I think it is a role as well. I think anybody who is a shaman is stepping into another aspect of themselves. By day they are a carpenter, by night they're a fisherman, but when they're in the ceremony, they are the maestro. You know, there is a theatrical element to that. And, you know, partly in shamanism, you have to kind of transform into something else. And you have to transform into something that's bigger than yourself, because you're often dealing with forces that are bigger than you. So, you know, if you this transformative element, I think, is part of the theatrics as well. And that's both for the audience and the shaman, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. You also mentioned this idea, which I think is pretty prevalent, and this idea of peacemaking. And I've done a lot of work, and I have a lot of respect for this Colombian guy named Amika, and he comes from this very small group in the Colombian Amazon called the Tubu. And they sit around in what are called mambiaderos. So they're working predominantly with mambe, which is a pulverized coca leaf. So it's a powder. It's also mixed with tobacco. They work a lot with, they call it.
Is that what you have now? Is that what you have in your mouth now?
That's exactly what I have now. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
I think people always wonder why my teeth are so green during these interviews, but that's why. But it's a beautiful medicine, I find, and they actually relate the coca and the tobacco paste, which they take, called ambia, as really being able to connect our words. And there's this real sense, actually, of the words becoming these tools of peacemaking. And so often people sit around through the tobacco, through the mambe, and there's a conflict resolution. As you said, you know, people may be screaming at each other, people may be getting in fights, but they view that as actually very essential to the well-being of the group. It also reminds me, I was watching this documentary. I was fortunate to work with Iboga, and I was watching this documentary on Iboga, and it was very fascinating to me, because this group of people who work with Iboga, which for people who may not be familiar with it, it's this elaborate, not only ritual, but a lifestyle. I mean, it's weeks in the making of the preparation, the coming together as a community, the ceremonial aspect, 2 very strong ceremonies, a death ceremony, a rebirth ceremony. It's a tremendous amount of work. And they did this ceremony for this woman. And I remember being really in awe, because the reason they gave this woman an Iboga ceremony is for her illness. And her illness, that they said, was that she was jealous. And I just remember thinking, you know, in so many of our cultures, we would just brush that off as like, well, so what? You know, jealousy, it's such a small thing. But they saw that as something that would eventually eat her from the inside, and also be detrimental to the group as a whole.
Wow.
This thing had so much power. And so they were trying to free her, to heal her of this jealousy. But so, you know, that aspect of peacemaking, of keeping things in balance, of harmony. And then also, as you mentioned, that this idea of a broader picture of beginning to navigate and bring the forces of nature into harmony, you know, trying to make offerings, trying to appease the spirits. There's another guy who I've worked with, not much, but he comes from the Arawaku people in the northern part of Colombia, in the Sierra Nevada. And it's very interesting, because really, if you ever ask him a question like, why am I sick? Why am I suffering? Why is humanity suffering? His answer is almost always the same. And it's, you haven't made a payment.
Right.
And he's not talking just about, you know, cash payment. That something is out of balance. We've taken, but we haven't given back. There's not a reciprocity. There's not an act of, you know, I drink this water, I take this food, but what am I doing to give back? And eventually, when things become out of balance, then sickness arises. I mean, even from a more like Western perspective, that's what disease means. It means to be out of ease, or we're out of balance, we're out of harmony. So, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but do you have a sense of like why that seems to be such an important aspect? And I think something, as you mentioned, that's really overlooked. Like when people come to work with plant medicine or different shamanic practices, it tends to be more from that kind of view, as you were saying, maybe like a yogic tradition or a new agey tradition. This is all about me and my growth, which there's 100% validity to that as well.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
not necessarily seeing things in a bigger picture.
Yeah, it's it's interesting what you talked about the heart and connecting the heart to your speech. I mean, the Bushmen talk about this concept of dirty words, and the dirty words spoken by others, perhaps to you, or the dirty words you speak out, that they kind of infect your heart and they eat away at it until you die. So it's this idea of being infected by this malice that you have for perhaps yourself or other people that eats away at you. But this aspect of being connected to nature, I mean, we have like a tree, the possibility of being uprooted, where we do not receive, spiritual nourishment or even physical nourishment. You hear, a lot of modern research is talking about, the bacteria that's found in forests or the fungi that's found in forests, which is essential for our immune systems. If you go to the average hunter-gatherer's immune system, they have like 1,000 times more positive gut bacteria, for instance. So, physically or spiritually, we disroot ourselves from nature, we're going to suffer. And whether we believe or perceive of these aspects of nature, it's important to have reciprocity, and that reciprocity can just come in the form of gratitude, which is an incredibly powerful offering in and of itself. But it's like any relationship. If you just, carry on taking your flatmate's tea, coffee, and everything he has in the fridge without giving anything back or even saying thank you, they're not going to be very happy, and eventually they're probably going to spike your tea or something, aren't they? So it's the same with nature. It's many indigenous people would say that certain places in nature, it's not that, have been forgotten. And so they would say that the spirits become disillusioned and angry with people. And I've certainly had experiences of that, of sort of this sense that the spirits of a certain land have been, maybe at one point were honoured and worshipped. And certainly in the British Isles, we had just today, I picked up this book. Talking about books flying out at you. It's a book on fairy lore of the British Isles. And, so obviously in Britain as well, we had this this tradition of honouring the local land spirits and honouring the land and nature itself. And that's something that we've completely disregarded in modern times. But I do think it's important. And you're going to have a much better time of things if you honour nature, honor your ancestors even, and ancestors is an incredibly important one. That's like your bloodline, essentially, going back thousands of years, and you disconnect yourself from that. You're kind of just floating in an ether, and these things do have an impact on you and a pull on you in ways that you don't understand. And just, I think we can kind of position ourselves incorrectly in reality. So what I mean by that is, we think that we're in a city and that we're in work and we're in this technological environment, but we're not. We're in nature. We're in, God's domain, and we need to keep reminding ourselves that we are in that domain and not. Even in the city, you see life sprouting out everywhere. So it's not that, nature is outside the city. Actually, the city is in nature.
Yeah. Another thing you were speaking about, which I think is very interesting, is you were mentioning with the Bushmen, they create this needle or dart out of clay, and it's this physical representation of potentially what they're seeing that they're extracting. And I think that's sometimes difficult for a lot of people to understand. And to me, it seems like one of the things that it's pointing towards is, in a way, this disconnect of what we take to be reality. And I think so much of the shamanic world, when they are entering a reality, it's a potentially a different reality from the normal waking reality that most of us call reality. And yet, as people like, I think very beautifully, like Ramana Maharshi says, when you're awake, you're there. When you're asleep, you're there. When you're in a deep dream, you're there. We're always there in a way. And yet we compartmentalize these realities as if there's something different, as if in that dream state, that's not real, even though how could it not be real? Because that's the only reality in that moment. And it seems like so many of these practices, which these shamanic traditions are pointing towards, is an entering of a reality that's not just the waking state of reality that most of us take to mean what is real. And that in that however we want to refer to it, altered space, we have access to a tremendous amount of knowledge, and in a way, maybe even a greater knowledge, because we're not inherently bound by the very beautiful laws that allow this waking reality to happen. Things like time and space and gravity and distance. But in that space, we're able to access other things. And I think a lot of us, we would look at that and say, very much like that clay, well, that's just not real. And yet, potentially for that person, that maestro in that space, as you said, it is a physical manifestation of something that's beyond that physical form. So why do you think that's important? And also that we have that disconnect? Because like many things, the proof is in the pudding. And as I'm sure, you've seen so many times, like when people do this work, there's real benefit, there's tangible benefit. And yet often we will also, in a way, dismiss that as a fantasy, or, something came to me and it healed me, but that was just an illusion. And yet I'm left being healed from that thing that I was looking to be healed from. But there's not that willingness to look at things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think. Well, firstly, I think people are going through and experiencing different realities all the time, like whether they know it or they don't. I mean, just in the course of a day, the Buddhists talk about it quite well in terms of, the hell realms and the heavenly realms, and you can experience all of those all in one day. You can experience a hell realm if you wish, or, we've all experienced it. No matter what you do, you just feel angry and you go outside and everything is just horrible. People are looking at you the wrong way, you're bumping into things, just everything annoys you. That's a hell realm, right? And then you wake up the next day, you wake up on the right side of the bed, and you go out and everyone's suddenly smiling and they're wonderful, and the trees are blossoming and the flowers. That's a heavenly realm, right? It's so your perception is incredibly important about what you experience. But we're almost afraid to go there. if you speak to anybody about dreams or visions, often they would recoil in horror because it's something that's so alien. And I just think often it's a fear. It's a fear of the unknown, maybe a fear of the things that go bump in the night. And it's also a fear of mental illness. We have if you experience anything other than what's prescribed as reality by science, by media, by these things, then you must be crazy, because that's what they all say is the right way to experience life. But effectively a modern invention. It's for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years that's not been the common theme of reality. And actually, in a lot of the world, it's not the common theme of reality, even in incredibly industrialized nations like Japan, for instance, or Thailand. They will have offerings to spirits, and they will connect with their ancestors, and they will have a very strong connection. So I don't know why in the West we completely disregarded it in a way that we have. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's by design. I mean, putting my conspiracy hat on, is it by design? Because if you disconnect somebody from the source of goodness for themselves, and they have to look for it elsewhere in other means and other ways, their satisfaction in commodification and in purchasing, and there's a relentless kind of void that comes with that disconnection, that needs to be filled with something. And often that's various forms of addiction or purchasing or whatever it may be. And I think we're very busy, and I think that disconnects a lot of people from these aspects of themselves. If your mind is running 1,000 miles an hour about, which is of course a byproduct of just where we live. It's not a judgment on people. It's just how we live right now. But it's you've got like 10,000 things coming in on your Facebook feed, on your Twitter feed, and this enrages you and that enrages you. You're commenting on this. It's relentless. I mean, how are you supposed to connect with anything? You haven't even taken a moment to pause in several days. So it's it's a strange one. I think you saw with the advent of industrialization, the change in lighting, for instance, the change in food, the change in working hours, the disconnect from the natural rhythms of our environment. Those things start to etch away at our connection to nature. I guarantee if anyone out here goes out into nature, goes camping for 2-3 weeks out in the wilderness, and you do some offerings out in nature, you will have some kind of connection with nature in a way that you haven't experienced in a long time. Because I know that, because you're human, and humans have this innate ability to connect with the rest of nature, just like all the other animals do. And all traditional, I wouldn't say, I'm not going to say all, but a lot of traditional cultures that I've come into contact with, have this kind of archetypal story about a time when man could connect and speak to the animals and speak to the plants and communicate directly with them. And that sounds like a fairy story, but also I've seen many things about people that have that direct connection with nature in that way, and I've had glimpses of it myself. And so, like that story with the spirit I experienced in Namibia, I mean, like I say, the very first thing that occurred to me is that somehow, some way, experienced this deep sadness about how we disconnected ourselves. And it's we've kind of taken on, the Bible talks about false idols. What does that really mean? What I would say that God and love and life and nature are synonymous terms. And so if you are disconnecting from that source, you might throw in universe in there as well if you're not particularly religious or don't like the idea of God. But if you're disconnecting from that true object of devotion and gratitude, then you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're disconnecting yourself from the true source of your being, and whether that's chasing money or chasing fame or even following any other force that is not that, and that which is contained within your heart, you know?
Yeah. Something else with that story of the little clay figure, which you touched on, and you said a lot of times we could just attribute it to placebo, which again is an interesting phenomena because we know the placebo to be true, but even the language we use, we often say, well, that's just placebo, as if that's not having an impact, and yet we all know it has a tremendous impact. And so it kind of going back to this idea of belief or faith, which has also in a way become a dirty word for a lot of us. It's seen as something that only a simpleton or a simple mind would have faith, because they can't back it up necessarily by anything tangible. Therefore, they're dumb in a way. And yet I find it an interesting thing, because as we, I think it was Nietzsche who said God is dead. And in this way, as a society, as we seem to be losing faith, we also seem to be gaining depression and anxiety and fear and disconnection. And to me, it seems like those two things, it's not just a correlation, it's a direct causation. And again, a really common idea in a lot of these shamanic paths, and not just shamanic, but really religious paths all over the world, is this idea of faith, and what a powerful tool that is. And I think one of the interesting things about a lot of these paths, kind of as you were saying yourself, again, which is a really common idea of surrendering, of letting go, of allowing something to maybe overtake us, to release into something, to allow these barriers, these mind, physical barriers to actually begin to fall away, that we can be filled with something, and filled with something that we maybe can't 100% verify to someone else and like put it on a piece of paper and say, look, this is what it is.
Yes, here's the measure of it, 2,000 parts of it. It's so good.
And yet, as you said, and I think it's a common experience that people have, like that experience is real, and it's real in a way that nobody can take it away from them. And someone can say, well, that's just chemicals, or that was just a hallucination. And yet for the person who experiences that, in a way, there's this idea of faith, but it's not an idea of faith of like an unexperiential faith. It's something that's been touched inside someone that truly gives them this idea of reverence, of faith, of gratitude, these words that you pointed towards. I know it's kind of a big question, or maybe like I'm not sure where I'm going with it, but where do you think that idea of faith fits in? And I don't know if you feel the same, but why do you think that that's potentially been lost for so many of us?
Yes. I definitely like to speak to that. I mean, faith, as you say, real faith comes when you've had an experience of something, and so you've been kissed, you've been touched by something divine, perhaps, and then maybe in those moments where that seems like it doesn't exist or is not far away, the faith comes that you know that it's always eternal, that it's always with you, that you trust that it is. I once met a sheikh, like a Sufi teacher, and he said to me, darkness is nothing but the absence of light, and therefore when aspects of like doubt and fear come in, those are just, they call it shaitan, like the devil, that the devil comes in and he pretends to be it superimposes himself in front of the light and pretends to be all and everything, when in fact the light is there all along. The devil's job is to tell you that the light doesn't exist, that love is not enough, that God is not there, that it's folly, that it's ridiculous. That's his job. and he's doing a very good job of that at the moment, you know, in an archetypal aspect. I once had an experience in ceremony with that powerful shaman that I spoke about in the beginning, where I had this experience where I felt like I was drifting down into hell, being pulled into hell, where there was nothing but blackness upon blackness. Literally, I was in a full lit, moonlit room, incredibly bright, and then it was like a veil of darkness came down in the room, and all light just got extinguished, and I was terrified. And I remember somebody saying to me in the ceremony, who I knew, just focus on love. And I remember the voices, just, that's ridiculous, don't focus on that. And you know, that's a really common aspect of the shamanism as well. These voices, these aspects of doubt that whisper in the shaman's ear and trying to sway them off in a different direction. I'm sure you've experienced that, and many other people have. This layer of kind of fundamental darkness that some forms of Buddhism calls it, that tries to obscure you from healing or from light. So anyway, I'm sat there and I'm going through this fear and sort of being pulled into darkness, and I just start saying the word love into my heart, just the word love, 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 and I'm singing now the word love, and just there in the darkness was a small pinprick of light, very small. And I was like, oh, and that gave me a little bit more hope, a little bit more faith, and I started to sing louder, love, love, love. And as I was singing, the light just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and my faith grew and my confidence grew, until I was singing so loud and the light was so big it filled the entire room and just completely dispersed whatever darkness this was. And for a very brief second, I heard this kind of clapping and cheering, and I saw all these spirits, these hundreds of spirits, like these old ancient warriors from the from the Amazon, kind of standing out. And they would look like kind of royalty, and sort of clapping, and sort of left me thinking, like, I don't see any difference between, like I said before, I don't see any difference between, you know, what we call in shamanism medicine, and, you know, God's love, God's life, life, nature. These are all synonymous terms. It's kind of this thread of this beautiful energy which exists in the world, whatever you want to call it. And there's certain people who tap into it, and so that's faith. And when you experience something, and maybe you do go through darkness, and maybe there are times when you don't feel it, and that's okay. It's just having the faith because you've experienced it before, and knowing that you will come through the other side and experience it again, and knowing that you wish to connect with those sources of light and not those sources of darkness which try to persuade you that it doesn't exist, that you're an idiot, that you're doing something childish, because those voices are there and they're very compelling. And so I think because we don't have these structures, and actually I think there's been almost you can say what you want about Christianity or Islam or any of these religions, but a religion is designed to house, with all its rituals and all its, stiff bureaucracy and all these things. It's like the box which houses an inner truth, which is the more mystical side. And all traditions have it. There's a mystical side of Islam, there's a mystical side of Christianity. You can't just, not everyone is willing to go to a cave and meditate to experience the mystical side of Christianity or Islam. And so you need this kind of outer casing in order to house it. But what it actually houses is something very true. And you can only point to it through proverbs, you can only point to it through stories. And people point to the stories as being wrong, as some proof that the inner working, the inner mysticism is somehow proven incorrect, but that's completely the wrong way of looking at it. The stories and the parables are only pointing towards something of which people experienced and trying to put these things into words. And so this box is housing this mysticism. And for some reason, there's been an ongoing effort in Western society for a long time, as Nietzsche says, to destroy this box and to throw away the inner contents of that box. And that's not a good thing, I would say, not a good thing at all. And we can, of course, there are, travesties of which occurred under religion's name. However, I'd like to argue that is, the folly of man that has taken those teachings and used them in ways which they were not intended. But to throw the proverbial baby out with the bathwater, the mysticism contained within the housing of religion is an incredibly foolish thing to do. So yeah. And why would you want to destroy that box and that jewel within it? Well, if why you want something else to be more powerful, you want something else to replace it, and so that's the only reason you would destroy that box. Or there's a and call whatever power that you will. There are many forces which try to put themselves in the place of that box. So
yeah, that goes into kind of the next question I was thinking, which is, as you were talking about earlier, with these shamanic paths, almost always there is this idea of dark versus light, and also, as you said, in all of these religious traditions, and it's something we seem to have also gotten away from. I mean, even in Christianity, it's a huge motif. I mean, the idea of God being the light, and there's the tempter being the devil, and the fall from grace, the fall from Eden. And so this is a really common thing that I think anyone who's really delved into many of these shamanic traditions, they're also saying the same thing. Like, I mean, even these words like curandero versus brujo, someone who heals versus someone who harms. And I think sometimes we look at that in like we can add so many things onto that. And yet, even in a really simple way, like you were saying, one day I go out and I experience light. The next day I go out and the circumstances haven't changed, and yet it's darkness. And in all of my thoughts and all of my actions, it's like, which am I choosing? Am I choosing to act from a place of love? Am I choosing to act from a place of harm?
Yeah.
And as you were saying, even some of these shamans, they can have a lot of power, but is that power being used for good? Is it being used for bad? And some of it may even be unconscious. I mean, like any of us, what words are we choosing to use when I have an interaction with someone? And if I have a lot of power and I choose to use words that harm, that can have a tremendous effect. And then if you take that and you like transpose that onto this realm where potentially there is more power, where there we are more open, we are more sensitive, these things can become magnified to a tremendous degree. Do you have a sense of, because it does seem like in this work that's something that people don't want to talk about, that things can be used for harm, that there potentially is darkness in the world, which I think we all know, if we look from any sort of like wider lens, like there's been evil in the world.
I think so.
But why do you think that's often kind of ignored in some of these traditions? I think more so from people looking at it from the outside.
Yeah, I think the propagation of kind of more Vedantic kind of ways of thinking in the 70s, I think that was a big part of it. This idea that, there is just now, good and evil don't really exist. And on one level, that's true. On one level, yes. On a universal aspect, it is all one. We are all love. That is true. And you can use that in your shamanic practice as well. Love itself is a very powerful protection, and it's a very powerful healing force. However, there are times in life when, no matter how much universal oneness that you have or good intention, you're hit in the face by a spade. And no matter how you mentally gymnastics away from that, it still hurts when you get hit by a spade. And so I think that there is this interesting dynamic which does occur where we deny the aspect of evil. And I think that is incredibly dangerous, because it's very naive to believe that there is no evil. On a human level, there is absolutely evil. We see it on a daily basis. And so we almost, I see it, people almost disregard the element that, perhaps somebody could have nefarious purposes, perhaps governments even could have nefarious purposes, perhaps nations could have nefarious purposes. And that's very interesting, how there's been this ideological movement to almost remove the existence of evil. And again, the devil works by pretending that it doesn't really exist. It's it's interesting, and people don't want to talk about it. It's not really nice to talk about, though, is it? It's not filled with rainbows and fluffy animals, and there's not a feel-good aspect to talking about the dark side, but it is an aspect of life, and it is an aspect of nature, and it is an aspect of all shamanic traditions, whether we like it or not. And I think we need to, and people, and our own hearts. If you look inside yourself and see, we can all see evil within us. It's just whether what we choose to focus on, and whether we choose to get taken away by those false idols, as we say, or make a concerted effort to follow that path of, medicine, of love, of life, which is not easy. That sounds fluffy in itself. I'm just going to be all loving and all light. It's a scary path to follow that. It's an incredibly difficult path to follow your heart. That's not an easy path. So, it takes a lot of courage to do that and stand by your principles. But at the same time, we, mustn't get into these false dichotomies of good versus evil as well. We need to acknowledge that evil does exist, and we need to resist it. But the best way to really resist evil is not to fight it. The best way to resist evil, in my opinion, is to create an alternate path. So we have these dichotomies which are set up, whether it's left versus right, whether it's good versus evil, whether it's male and female, whatever. We have these false dichotomies that are set up. So this versus that. But actually the answer is always somewhere in the middle. It's going this way. It's not going this way because you have a conflict. It's going this way. So, we need, in such times as evil, you need people who are aspirational. They're not trying to fight the system. They're not trying to take down the system. They're not trying to destroy, but they are trying to paint a picture of medicine, of life, of a way forward, something that's aspirational. So leaders like, Martin Luther King, who painted a beautiful, beautiful image for the future. He wasn't trying to fight racism. He wasn't trying to fight the evil forces of capitalism. He was trying to paint a picture, a beautiful vision for the future, or one of goodness. So I think we need to do that in our own hearts, and I think we need to do that as a humanity, to paint this picture, which we can all agree is a beautiful one, rather than fighting shadows, really. And I think, for what I say, that we do need to acknowledge the darkness. And even in shamanism, I think shamans can get caught in the fight. They can get caught in the, believing that they're virtuous because they say spiritually beat up a brujo, for instance. When in actual reality, what's happening is that they are slowly becoming what they despise. Unfortunately, that I've seen that time and time again. So, it's a fine balance between an understanding that evil exists and protecting yourself from it, but also not becoming the thing that you are fighting.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me, my friend Brian, who has I think, a pretty good understanding and knowledge of the Shipibo language, and this word that's often used, hakun, as he described it to me. And we speak about this in the podcast where I interviewed him, if anyone is interested in learning more about it. But this interesting idea that the word hakun is usually translated as good. And but he was saying on a deeper level, it means truth, because that which is true is inherently good. And on another level, it means that which is life-giving, that which feeds life, that which is in alignment with life. And so not good would be that which is not in service to life, that which is not true, that which is not good. And I think it points to this interesting idea that you were speaking of, which is this idea that destroying or fighting, especially destroying, is much easier than creating. It's much easier to say, well, to point out all of the problems and say, well, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. Let's tear it down. It's much more difficult to look at that, and as you said, to create something new out of that, to create a way forward that actually serves life, rather than perpetuating that idea of dividing life, of and it's not that it's not important to point out things that are wrong, but the way through that is to create, is to unite life, to transcend these dualities, and to actually create something from that. It also reminded me, because we have a mutual teacher, Ernesto, and I remember one day he was talking to us, and he said something like, curandero no es fácil, no es hi, ho, ho, ho. Usually he's a man of a few words. So that was pretty much the whole teaching. But that really impacted me, because, even from him, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and, really a faith in his ability, very clearly saying, like, this is not an easy path. Like, this isn't just some joke that anyone can become. So where do you think that difficulty arises? And I mean, because again, being a curandero can also be an archetype of a human being, of life. But where do you think that difficulty, especially in that path of becoming someone like that, why is that such a difficult path? Because as you said, I think a lot of people come to it and are like, oh, this is amazing. Like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to be able to heal all these people and communicate with God and love, and it's going to be amazing. And yet any of the really good ones I met would never say that. I mean, it brings up another example. When I was working at the temple, at the end of the retreats, we often do like kind of like a little gratitude thing, where the guests come and they can express words of gratitude towards the healers, or sing to them, or share with them something. And I remember one time that this woman, she started asking them questions, which we usually don't do, because it's not really like a teaching session. It's more like a session of gratitude. And she was kind of like, you guys are so amazing, and you just must be operating from this place of love and light, and this work must be so beautiful. And they just kind of all looked at each other, and it's almost they didn't know how to respond. But finally, the guy who speaks the best Spanish, he's like, actually, we're guerreros, like, we're warriors, and this work is really difficult, because we're constantly like having to go into darkness and try and bring order and try and extract these things. And I could see like she was kind of shocked, because that wasn't the answer she was expecting.
It's an interesting aspect to shamanism, and it's often kind of glorified, as you say, as people, experiencing bliss all the time, or experiencing oneness. And certainly for your work, you will experience that. But actually, if you're working with somebody who has some affliction, some darkness, then your job is almost like a dustbin cleaner. To not, it's not a glorified job. It's you are getting down and dirty, and helping that person liberate from those energies. And so that experientially is often not a particularly nice experience. And often you would need to traverse many trials in order to liberate that energy from that person and or yourself. Because it's not like you're completely immune from those energies and you're a curandero, so you're impervious and they completely bounce off you. It's not like that. In fact, often in my experience, sometimes you actually need to take those energies upon yourself in order to liberate those from that person. And again, whether you do that with love, whether you do that through force, is either way, you suffer through that process. And sometimes you suffer greatly. And, the work of the curandero is never done. You always have to keep cleaning yourself from, the energies that you build up around you, or the energies that you build up from the people that you're healing. And so it's difficult work. And because you are interacting with these energies, sometimes life gets really difficult because for whatever reason, things are attracted to you. Because you are, trying to work as a force for light. So things will sometimes try to stop you doing that. That's, and sometimes that's incredibly difficult. I don't know anybody who's been on this path that hasn't experienced extreme suffering. It's just the way it is. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little more about that? Because I think that's also something which is really important, which a lot of people don't necessarily think. But I mean, that's been a big part of my journey and learning process, and the people I've worked with is often this idea. And again, it's a very common shamanic motif, which is this idea of suffering. And even when working with other people, there often is this quality of taking on something to be able to release it or to transmute it, or even if it's not taking it on, like really going into that person's experience. And sometimes that can be a very dark place, a very hellish place, and learning how to navigate that, how to clean that. And I think it's something that, and I think I was probably guilty of this too, when before I started doing this work, was not valuing the work that these people were really doing. And, even things like arguing about price, like, oh my God, that person's charging, $50 for a ceremony. Someone else is, I can get it for 20. But then stepping back and realizing like, that is a tremendous amount of work that person is doing. In Western medicine, we value doctors at like the highest cost. I mean, medical treatment in most of the places we come from is enormously expensive. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars for certain treatments. So, but that aspect about either navigating or, as you said, sometimes even taking on that illness of that person.
It's I mean, literally you'll see shamans, they will need to say go on a diet themselves after they've done a particularly strenuous healing, or they need to go out and vomit. Or you often see shamans, if it's something particularly bad, they will take it in themselves. They need to vomit it out for the other person. So they're literally, like you say, taking the illness on themselves. I think, especially if you're new to this, you don't really have an understanding of the level of sacrifice these people are making on behalf of you to be able to liberate from your suffering. And it just seems like they're just singing some songs, or You know, they're just shaking a leaf. Don't get me wrong, there are shamans who do sit there and sing some songs and shake some leaves, and they don't do the work. You know, there is a difference between somebody directly going in and doing the work and somebody just sitting back and just running a ceremony. There's a very big difference. So, yeah, it's an incredible amount of sacrifice that these people give. Not sure where I was going with that.
Kind of that idea of taking on things in a way, because I think that's for people maybe outside, that's not something that they would ever really expect in a way, that someone is helping them to take on that, to be able to navigate it. And it's also this interesting dichotomy, because, you know, at the end of the day, there is a huge part of this work is that the patient themselves have to do the work. Like they have to be willing to go into certain things as well. And yet Correct. Not also realizing that the space and in that kind of co-creative experience, and as you said, there's certainly plenty of people who aren't doing that work, but very skilled doctors, practitioners, healers, however you want to call them, are doing that work.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And when you do get a skilled doctor in this way, they are relentless. They will not stop until they have taken care of what they need taken care of, you know, whether that means seeing for, 8, 12, 15 hours, they are relentless. It's, and it's not like they don't experience fear as well, especially in a very dark ceremony. It's, things are arising from people, fear, anger, all these emotions, all this darkness. And that, it's not like the shaman is immune to that. They are sitting within it and experiencing it. And their job is to drive through it and try to liberate those energies from every single person in the ceremony. They only feel better themselves when they've liberated it from everybody else. And even then they might need a 2-week layoff to be able to recover from that. But yeah, it's when I saw that, with the level of danger even sometimes that these shamans experience, it's really no joke when sometimes their very being is on the line in order to heal some of these certain conditions. And I mean, whether that sounds like folly to you, I don't care. It's true. And it's I think we need to have more respect and more an understanding of the skill level of these people. And it's not something that can be learned and laid down in a book or taught in a workshop or spoken verbally. This is something, a skill by which they have obtained by interaction with the spirits and dieting and incredible amounts of long sacrifice in the jungle, fasting, abstinence from foods, from sex, from social interactions, from life, really, in order to help you. And so, I think, and as well, it's, that thing about reciprocity. If you're going into a ceremony with your arms crossed, thinking about how you've paid $50 for this ceremony and how it's a rip-off, you're not going to get a very good healing. And that's not because the shaman doesn't try, because you're not open to it. You're not prepared to let go of your stuff because you're holding on to this resentment in yourself. He's not going to be able to, he or she is not going to be able to help you as easily as somebody who is completely grateful, trusting, open-hearted, and is able to give up their stuff to the shaman who's trying to help you to get rid of it. They can't forcefully take it from you. I'm sure they can, but it's much easier for them if you allow and work with them and work through your things and allow your spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical body to unravel from this constricting, noxious, force that is taking you over in whatever way. So that surrender is vital. So you need to work with a shaman that you trust, that you believe in, that you admire. And how do you find that? It's you need to look in their eyes. You need to, first and foremost, like we say, don't look for somebody who's powerful. Don't look for somebody who's even, I'd even be wary of somebody who spoke about how virtuous they are and how they're an incredible healer or anything like that. Anybody who believes that the medicine is them, I'd run away from. The medicine is the medicine, and the shaman is just the conduit for the medicine and works alongside with the medicine in order to be able to free the participant. But I think first and foremost, the best shamans that I've ever met in the world are not some, highly spiritual being that, with a glowing halo. That maybe that exists, but I've never seen one. The best shamans that I hold closest to my heart are the ones that are the most human. They're the most down to earth. They're the most, humble. They don't put themselves or anybody else on pedestals. So those are the ones that you want to look for.
Can you speak a bit about your journey? Because a lot of people listening to this have worked with especially ayahuasca, maybe to a slight degree tobacco. What that was like, your time in the Amazon and working with some of these plants like ayahuasca, tobacco, different trees, different diets you did. Obviously, you don't have to speak of anything personal that you don't want, but just kind of what some of those experiences were like for you.
Yeah, again, it's maybe I'll talk a bit about. I've talked to some about a little bit about the ceremonies that I experienced in Peru, and often they would be teaching experiences in the ceremonies in Peru, and that may be say teaching you how to sing even, or how to or receiving icaros. That's a common theme that happens with diets and working with these forms of shamanism, that songs will come to you. When I say come to you, they're almost like spirits unto themselves. So one shaman I worked with said that you would chapa, you would catch the icaros, and even in certain ceremonies, I've seen icaros sort of moving through the air, almost like snakes, sort of coming close to your ear and whispering their sound into your ear and asking if they could enter your body. So once they live in you, and whether that's received through a dream or through, usually during the course of a diet, you receive those in dreams, or you receive those maybe just even walking down the street. Suddenly, that's how I used to receive them. It's just walking down the street and experiencing this, almost like I would experience a feeling like I was going to vomit, actually. And instead of vomiting, what came out was a song. It was almost like this vibration would start vibrating in my stomach and just kind of explode out of my mouth. That's a really interesting thing about icaros, is that you don't sing icaros. They're not songs. They sing you, in a way. You're the instrument for the icaro. In a way, that's the way I always see it. And they come from the plants, and they have a life force kind of unto themselves, and they express through you. But in terms of the diets I underwent with Ernesto, maybe I'll talk about that a little bit. It's well, firstly, the diets were an experience of liberation from perhaps the last vestiges of the slight that was done to me by the unscrupulous shaman that I spoke of before. So many powerful dreams of being attacked, or having to defend myself, or until those dreams became a vision of me seeing that person so far away that they were looking for me but they couldn't find me. And I remember that was one of the last times I ever experienced that person in sort of my in my life. So and then as the diets progressed, it was an experience of a sort of deepening. Actually, it was interesting with the diets because, with Ernesto, as I say, I've undertaken a lot of diets, both with other shamans and on my own as well in the United Kingdom, which I'd probably like to go on to a little bit. But with the diets with Ernesto, it was almost like this path. At the beginning, I would have dreams that were very powerful and sort of dreams of flying and being up in the air and liberation. And then the dreams kind of counterintuitively would become much more hazy. I'd have dreams of being in dark tunnels. And so for me, that was kind of an expression of the medicines of the trees kind of going much deeper into the body and working on much deeper aspects, which perhaps even I couldn't perceive at times. And I think that's, certainly where the faith aspect comes in, because, you've had all these amazing experiences at the beginning and then they go away, but it doesn't mean nothing is going on. It was only until, towards the end, towards my final series of diets, that's never final, but my final at that time, that I would experience again this kind of re-emerging from this underground place to a more liberated perspective. And actually, the final dream I had on the final day of my diets was was me working in McDonald's, and it was a beautifully clean kitchen, but there were no customers. And I remember very clearly seeing one of the manager's labels, and it said that it was all in gold and it was shining, and it said the word Sham. And she said to me, your work is now done. You can have some time off now. And she opened the door, and outside was all these trees, and they were trees from England actually, but they were multicolored and rainbow, kind of jewel encrusted, and it was this incredible experience of stepping into this beautiful energy. And I looked up the day after the meaning of Sham, and it means blessings from God. And so I remember thinking, wow, that's just how, and that's another expression of faith as well. That time through the diets when you didn't think anything was happening, that you just thought, right, why am I doing this? And you were experiencing again a lot of suffering, especially with drinking tobacco. It can be quite arduous and sometimes painful. But this moment that it all came full circle, and then you experience this liberation. And then everything from then on, I lived in complete bliss there on after. Of course, that's not true, but actually the diets, what happened afterwards was really for at least 6 months, but probably, more honestly, more like a year of integration of those processes. And it almost felt like these incredibly strong energies were inside me that were still working away and expanding and opening. And that would throw me into some actually feeling, again, going into sort of bliss and then darkness and then bliss and then darkness. And other people I've spoke to sort of experienced this as well. It was almost like a replay of the diet, but in high speed. And that would repeat over the sort of course of the year, and those oscillations would eventually slow down until they flattened out into a plateau of stability. But I remember that being incredibly sensitive, having spent so long in the jungle, in isolation, away from people, to sort of, coming back, and then on my second week, deciding it was a good idea to go into central London, for instance, and frankly, almost experiencing like PTSD from being around that many energies. I mean, it was incredibly overwhelming. So there's a strange paradox of working in this way, that you become on one level stronger and another level, you become more vulnerable in a way because you become a lot more sensitive to things that you wouldn't have perhaps perceived before. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that trees are so important? You mentioned that near the beginning of the conversation. Certainly, in many of these Amazonian traditions, trees are considered the kind of the ultimate plants that are dieted. That they have a tremendous power, a tremendous wisdom, and an ability to heal us on the physical level, the mental, emotional level, to connect us on a spiritual level. Then even as you were mentioning in some of these more Western shamanic traditions, like the fairies and the druids, from what I understand, even a lot of the druidic language is based around, I think, 7 different trees. And in North Native American traditions, these were like the medicines, the teachers. I mean, almost all of us, maybe pop aspirins or something without maybe even realizing like that's the willow tree that we're taking, that it also has this beautiful effect on the heart. Why do you think in so many of these traditions that the tree, I mean, even you look at Buddhism, like, I don't think it's probably a coincidence that the Buddha received his enlightenment under a very particular tree. So the Garden of Eden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Why do you think that's such a common motif, not just in the Amazon, but really around the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's on so many levels. I mean, on that physical and medicinal aspect, it contains, so many vital minerals and possible medicines within trees. But they're this incredible storehouse of life. They live for hundreds of years. They are one of the largest beings, if not the largest being on the planet, bar perhaps fungi, if you want to consider them to be like one unit of being. And they contain this wisdom. They're very old. They are a conduit. They connect to both the earth and the heavens. So they have this, they're like the shamans would often speak about the trees having both a light and a dark aspect. And they'll even talk about, collecting tree barks from the light and the dark side of the tree to sort of draw in those dichotomous energies. And they're both considered important for healing, because if you don't understand the dark aspects, then you are not able to heal those in other people. So traditionally they're considered to be kind of the wisdom keepers. They are, teachers and kind of storehouses of knowledge, which has been passed down from generation to generation. They are also the kind of the housing place for the spirits themselves. They are like an ecosystem for the spirits in a way. So like you say, in the British law, the various fairies were associated with different trees, and I mean, I don't know if I should tell the story, but I mean, I have had experiences with fairies. As ridiculous as that sounds, I've had experience with fairies through dieting with British trees, which, much to my surprise. But that was very clear. And something very interesting for me about dieting with the British trees was it almost felt like my palpable experience was that there was this almost over eagerness to interact on a spiritual level with you through partaking in the diet, and almost the sense that people in times gone by would have connected to the trees on a spiritual level, and there was some mourning for that time. And so I just found, I'm not comparing the British and the Amazonian trees, because they're very special in their own way. But for me, dieting with the British trees, I just felt, because they're connected to my ancestry, it was a much more direct and speedier way of connecting with the plants. And there was like a very willing and open interaction instantaneously with the British trees, which was very beautiful, very nourishing, very healing.
It's interesting because often certain trees are given certain qualities. Maybe like Ayuma is considered a protector, and as Ernesto would say, it's like you have this kind of these war tanks now at your disposal. And I mean, I've told this story a couple of times, but I remember when I died at that tree, and he was saying that in the beginning, I was like, well, that's just, that's just kind of his fantasies. That's how he sees the world. And I had experienced these amazing things with these trees, which is why I continued. I mean, it was the first, I think, experience of dieting where, especially with tobacco, that first diet where I felt something very profound. It was an extremely challenging experience for me. I thought I was going to die the first night, the second night, the third night.
Yeah.
It wasn't really until the fourth night where I at least didn't have that thought of I was going to die. But it was fascinating because, with that tree, because I'll often use that as an example, it was a number of years later. And I can't remember whether I was helping to facilitate an ayahuasca ceremony or a diet, but I went into this very strong experience of kind of chasing after this very like demonic being. And at the time, it seemed like the strongest thing I had ever faced. And at the same time, I was extremely scared, but also surprised that I was continuing to go after this thing. I mean, almost surprised in my own courage in a way. And we ended up going up to the top of this like skyscraper and battling. And I thought I had defeated it. But then at the last second, it like jumped through this window and into this abyss. And I was kind of standing at this open window, like looking down, like, oh my God, like I lost it, like in almost this sense of like disappointment. And then all of a sudden, it was like someone turned on a light switch, and in that blackness, it was like thousands of lights turned on, and they were all of these like these warplanes. And all of a sudden, with a force that was just unimaginable, they just started destroying this thing all at once, and it was gone. And then the lights turned off, and that was it. And for me, like in that moment, I realized like that was that tree. That's what he was talking about. And it came to aid me in a way. But it's an interesting phenomenon. And I just bring that up because often certain trees are given these certain qualities. And I often remember in the beginning thinking, well, is this just, if someone tells us this, then we naturally begin to think that or to dream that. But through having done this work now, more and more, it's a common motif that I see that people experience certain qualities when they die of certain plants or trees, that even if I don't implant that seed before, there's these very common things that come up. So I don't know if that's a common experience for you, but if it is, where do you think that's coming from? Because I think for a lot of people, like we may realize that in a certain way, like we would drink chamomile to calm us, or rosemary may have a lot of like internal heat or fire, so maybe people use it for their hair to stimulate hair growth. There's still a very strong tradition in some sense of using plants because they have specific qualities. But I think most people, if we said, well, this tree has a spirit, it has certain teachings that only this tree will teach, people would be like, that seems kind of crazy. And yet also from my experience, that's something I've seen to be true. So where do you think that's coming from? Because you also mentioned this idea of a fairy, and that was a very common thing in a lot of Western shamanism, was that each tree had its fairy, it had its property. You can even look at a lot of these old I was really fascinated a number of years ago. I remember seeing this old painting, and it was about fairies, and she was surrounded by different plants, but the plant she was sitting under was Towe or Datura or Devil's Trumpet. And is that just completely random? I would doubt it. It seemed like a very specific sign of like, hey, this plant, that's what it's inducing, is this experience of this particular thing.
Yeah, I think it's in the same way as, yeah, like a different color would have a different effect on your being, or a different food. Curry is very different from ice cream, for instance. It's I'm not sure that's a good analogy, but yeah, certainly different plants, they do carry different energies, and they have perhaps dichotomous energies. So rose, for instance, does have like a very heart-opening property, but it also has the thorns, which are an aspect which can cause harm, or is used for protection. Yeah, I don't think it's yeah, because I've had also many experiences of experiencing those properties of the trees, through ceremony, and experiences of sort of becoming the tree, or being enveloped by, protected by, or assisted by these plants and trees, or taught by, or communicated with by. So I have experienced some of the law in which the shamans talk about through those ceremonies. Even the little people that I talked about in the beginning, they were particular to a tree which I was working with at the time. But in other aspects as well, I've also experienced the opposite, where somebody would talk about a tree as being this aspect. So particularly, some trees I've worked with, some people may consider to be, all trees have an aspect of dark and light, but some people consider them to having more aspects of darkness within them that needed to be sort of transmuted and understood from and learned from. But my experience, in fact, was completely the opposite. In fact, so filled with light and bliss and beauty and sort of divinity, which was completely surprising to me. So I think, there is an aspect that, the plants have a personality and they have a nature unto themselves. And much like, the humming, the bumblebee likes a particular plant in my garden, which has nice blue flowers. Birds might like the rose bush I have up there. So different spirits, I think, are attracted to different ecosystems of the trees, I'd imagine. And yeah, I think it's a bit like that. There's these kind of ecosystems which develop around them. Yeah.
You were speaking about when you were with the Bushmen and this dance and this idea that they were putting this thing in your stomach. I think you called it the noom.
Yeah.
And it's something I've experienced, and I think a lot of people have. I think you also mentioned this idea of heat, and you were also referring to some of these other traditions, like in some of these Chinese traditions, the Dantian, where we're holding this power. And it's something I very much experienced with tobacco, with different trees, was this like internal heat, and also this sensitivity that you mentioned. I would often remember coming out of diet and just wanting to go to Iquitos just to like be surrounded by some life to
then regretting it.
And then usually regretting it. But like one of the things is I would want to check my phone to just say to friends and family, like, hey, I'm still here, I'm alive. But I would remember very clearly, like after a few seconds of holding this phone, the heat was so intense. It was almost like I was feeling the heat coming from this phone into my body, and it was this internal heat. And I'd have to put the phone down because it was too much. And just remembering, like through a lot of that process, it was like there was this internal heat that was developing. And that also, again, seems to be, you're even mentioning like this, I don't know if it was a Tibetan practice, but like this generating of an internal heat. Do you think that's something that's correlated to some of these shamanic traditions, and why that is of kind of generating this internal heat?
I do, but perhaps different shamanic traditions have different ways of developing this. Like I would consider, there is no real difference, I think, between this concept of, they consider that comes from the animals, or even some plants sometimes. There's one particular plant by which they believe that it comes from. But I don't think they would have much of a difference consideration between that and the which is acquired from plants through the diet. So I think there is definitely some relation. And in fact, you know, even when I went to see the Bushmen, they said that you were already full of so I must have acquired that from somewhere. And I think it's from the work with the plants. So what is that? It's perhaps best described as life force, I guess. It's in every single tradition, like you say, from Tibetan Tummo practices where you're developing this internal heat, from Kundalini practices, from Qigong to the different shamanic practices, but they all have a different way of kind of developing this. Whenever I spoke to shamans in Peru about it, they've always said that that's the power of the trees. Whenever you experience that heat coming up in a ceremony, I'm sure you've experienced ceremonies where you have just an unbelievable volcano of heat which kind of erupts from you, which is common after you've experienced the diets. It's that expression of the medicine kind of coming through you and waking up. So the Bushman's way of waking that medicine up was through dance, and their way of acquiring it was through the touch of other healers and through various other practices. Other healers might acquire that heat through various dream practices, or passing it on through the ancestral line. Others may acquire it through dieting or through various meditational practices even. It always has fascinated me, but I've tried to do my best to kind of not try to boil down these practices and try to assign unique unto themselves, and so they should be, considered and respected in that way. But it's an interesting dynamic how they all have that. And many shamans, they will, even in Mongolian shamanism, when they experience the trance, there's usually an incredible sense of heat that arises from that practice.
You also mentioned three words that I find really common in a lot of this work. One was this idea of death, seems to be a really common archetype. Also, you mentioned dreams, and then the other was this idea of surrender. Like when you were dancing, it eventually, something shifted when the mind stopped expecting something, and it just actually kind of, the dance happened. Like we flowed with the dance. It wasn't expecting to receive something or wanting something. And I think that's why also the word dance is used so frequently, like to be able to dance with life, to be able to dance with these medicines, and this idea of letting go, of surrendering, of like a tearing down, in a Buddhist terms, like the tearing down of the beams of this house. That's when finally something happened. So I know that's kind of a big question, but those three words seem to be really, really common and really powerful. The idea of death, the idea of dreaming, because so much of this work does seem to be in that dream realm, and that idea of letting go.
Yeah, I think many traditions, in terms of the dreams, they consider up to three aspects of dreams. So you have the just the normal everyday dreams, the mind stuff which comes up. You have like another level of dream which is more kind of prophetic, and then you have a level of dreaming which is like a direct teaching or direct interaction, like a medicine dream, which is truly an interaction with a presence or a being. And they consider often in all traditions actually those to be real with a capital R, like you say, they consider those to be truthful. But I think in terms of death and in terms of the dance, I think we need to, in order to experience something other, you need to kind of go very deep within yourself. And in order to do that, you need to let go of the boundaries which you've set up, your physicality, your expectations. You need to completely dissolve them in order to let go and dance with the energy and the spirits which are presenting in front of you. So often I see people who perhaps are experiencing ayahuasca for the first time, they will come in with a set of expectations, or they've watched some films about what ayahuasca should be, and they'll go in with this kind of mindset, and so they are not experiencing what is presenting to them in that moment, which might be an upset stomach, various strange thoughts that are going on in the head, but that is the experience that you're having. And until you surrender and engage with that's flitting around in your face, trying to grab your attention, but you're trying to look over here. It's trying to draw your attention in, so you to engage with it in a conversation. If you're looking over here, or you're thinking about your phone, or you're thinking about dinner, or you're thinking about those intentions that you're not getting, or I'm not getting those wonderful visions, you're not going to interact with this. And this is a thing that's going to take you. I'm waving my hand, by the way, anybody who's listening to the podcast. That's that thing that is waving in front of your face is going to be the thing that pulls you into that other realm, that other reality, that other state of existence, that teaching. So you have to be, you have to humble yourself. You can't go into this stuff being big. You have to be small. And when you're small, you get out of the way of yourself, and then you are able to experience what's there to experience. And I think with life as well, it's very easy to go through a whole day, and then at a blink of an eye, you look up from your phone or your computer, especially those people who work on a computer, and it's dark outside, and you can't remember anything about what's happened in the day. You're not really experiencing it. You're kind of locked into that reality, aren't you? Locked into this kind of cyber reality. But in the same way as you can easily lock into that cyber reality, you need to lock into a more way of connecting to nature. You need to get out there and engage with the plants, really see with your eyes, really experience nature. And that's the way we're going to connect a bit deeper to nature, as if we surrender into that, we immerse ourselves in that, and realize that we are small creatures, animals, beings of nature, and position ourselves in that way.
You're also speaking about this idea of the heart, and what a common theme that is. You see it in Christianity. Jesus is very often represented as like his heart is on fire. It's full. Yeah. It's full of love. It's full of light. I think even the Egyptians, who I've always been fascinated with, and I could be getting this wrong, but I remember it was really interesting because even when I was younger, from a more Western perspective, there was very little focus on the heart, that even this idea of consciousness, of the mind, of everything was focused on the brain. And for the Egyptians, they said like the seat of consciousness was in the heart. And I remember reading by, kind of academics, like, well, they were silly. They didn't know. We actually know that it's the brain that's doing these things. But for them, it was the heart. Like that was the seat of the soul. And again, that seems to be such a common thing. Why do you have any sense of like why the heart is such an important like organism? Because I think a lot of us like realize that in some way too. Like we get heart pains. I mean, even when we're speaking about love, which is what so many of these traditions are pointing towards, we have like a pangst, we say a broken heart when we lose that love. Like the heart is a very, very sensitive organ, and yet something that we don't necessarily put a lot of thought into. We, even in so much research, like it's on neural pathways, and but it's almost like we forget about this organ, which literally, even like the word spirit, it comes from like these Latin words like respirar, which is the same word as spirit, to breathe, and to have that inhale, exhale, that beating heart, the expansion, the contraction is truly what it means to be alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that question. Such a beautiful question. I mean, I was watching a little documentary on YouTube last night about the life cycle of a chick. Okay, and the very first thing which is developed in a chick is its heart. Like you will see, the very first thing that develops is a small 1 millimeter beating heart. So this is, I believe, true for humans as well, though someone's probably going to correct me. That this is the first organ that's developed in our body. It's the first point which receives life in us. In various Sufi traditions, the seed of life is placed within the heart. It's that aspect of God, which is a part of reality, has been positioned in your heart, and it's that connection to life that you have. So it's something that we need to foster. Again, in Sufi tradition, they talk about that the heart is obscured, that it's covered with dust, and that we need to remove that dust in order for it to reflect cleanly the light of blessings. And so, yeah, in literally every single tradition that I've seen, the soul, because I'm fascinated by the question, what is the spirit, and where is it? And without fail, every single tradition says that the spirit is somewhere within the chest cavity, from the xiphoid process up to the neckline, somewhere within that region. So, and they're just very clear with it. I just every single time I ask, "Where's the spirit?" Oh, it's there. There you go. And different traditions have different interactions with the spirit. Perhaps they have different conceptions of the spirit. I would say the people who had the most definite and kind of refined understanding of what the spirit was actually the Aboriginal healers that I worked with. He had a very direct, visceral understanding of the spirit, how it worked, how it would move, how it interacted, how it would leave through dreams. And for me, that was very interesting. But I think it's as simple as it's your connection really to divinity, often expressed through the crown, from the heart, which is why you see, various paintings of various saints with a halo. But yeah, it's your connection to divinity, and it's your connection to your own spirit, which is the closest thing that you have to divinity. It's your own personal divinity also. So yeah, anybody wanting to connect more deeply with anything spiritual, you need to focus on the heart. And that's why, sometimes I see things like, say, the mindfulness practice. I think sometimes such practices, not always, but sometimes can become quite cold and hard, because they can be quite mentally focused. They don't have that aspect of the warmth of the heart. And so I think this is a really important aspect to bring into your practice and ground yourself in that being of the heart. In all spiritual practice, when you say prayer, for instance, it's not good enough to just say a prayer from your mouth. You need to say the prayer from your heart. You need to feel it. You need to embody it. You need to embody that gratitude and that feeling. The same with the icaros. They're not sung from your mouth. They're sung from your heart. They're expressed from your chest, and they come out. So yeah, it's always fascinated me, the faculties of the heart and the mysterious nature. It's almost like a doorway, through which you can sort of enter other modes of being. I actually have a library of like thousands of pictures, or hundreds at least, of images of various representations of the heart or the spirit, from various places around the world. But it's a fascinating subject for sure.
Yeah, I was even just remembered. I mean, in the Egyptian tradition, when one entered death, there was all of these tests and trials and tribulations and journeying. I mean, it seemed like so much of that knowledge was a preparation for death, and yet, like, the ultimate thing was the weighing of the heart on the scale, and the heart had to be lighter than a feather. And for me, that really represented a lot of that too. It's like we carry all of these blocks and beliefs and traumas and these things, and they weigh our heart down. They keep our heart heavy, and to be able to free of that is to make the heart as light as a feather. And I always found that such a beautiful metaphor.
It is, and I think, if that's the ultimate work for the curandera, I think that's probably is the ultimate work for the curandera, is to remove that obscuration from the heart, and to help liberate people from that, so they can connect more deeply with themselves. It's something that I encourage everyone to work with. Do your research. I think there's a beautiful practice from Tibetan Buddhism called metta practice, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is visualizing, sending well wishes to various people, and sort of encouraging that ember of well wishes and good feeling and metta to develop in your heart. And it's an incredibly powerful practice, and especially one that is very good for mental health and mental well-being.
So one of the things you mentioned, and this is where we might start to get in some dicey water, but you were mentioning this idea of like destroying the box, and you were also speaking about, I think, this really important idea where you said this idea of worshiping false idols. And for me, that was kind of also tying back to this idea of faith, that like as humanity loses faith in something greater than ourselves, as we lose this idea of God, of this disconnection from nature, we begin to worship false idols, and the false idol being man, being humanity, man, woman, however we want to look at it. But the, even in a religious tradition, I think that was one of the beautiful things about Judaism, about Islam, about Vedic philosophy, was there was idea that we don't worship false idols, that the true essence of life is ineffable. We can never, you never go to a mosque and see an idol, because they realize it can't be put into a form. You look at early Buddhist temples, there was never a statue of Buddha as a man. It was something ineffable. But it seems like as we begin to become disconnected to that, to nature, to God, to faith, however we want to look at that, we start to put our faith in man, in an idol, in a form that can be reduced. And I think throughout history, that's where so much suffering has come from, when we begin to worship false idols. And you see that in the extreme when you see people like Stalin or Mao or Pol Pot, and really the horrific consequences. And I don't think that was a coincidence that with all of those people, they were very anti-God. Like, God was the antithesis of what it meant to be alive, because that was a false idol, and everything could be reduced, everything could be controlled, everything could be controlled by the state. That we knew everything, humans know everything, we're more powerful than nature. I think that's where a lot of like colonialism comes from, is this idea that we can conquer nature, that man has more wisdom, has more knowledge than the thing we come from. Very much like this beautiful Zen saying where they say, like, a knife can cut all things, but a knife can never cut itself. In the way that man can know all things, but it can never know itself with that tool of the mind. And it seems like, so much of the suffering that we're kind of creating ourselves comes when we begin to worship false idols. And that so many of these systems, and that was one thing that we kind of had in common, that we realized was kind of beginning to point towards this phenomena that we're seeing, which is this idea of worshiping false idols, which is very often in the form of a state, in the form of a controlling body, where we put our faith in these things, in these organizations. And I think very often for me, and I think that's where a lot of this plant work is so fascinating, because I think the primordial emotion that we're dealing with, that again, like, blocks the heart, is this fear of life. And I think so much of, like, what we're experiencing in the pandemic, even, it comes from this deep sense of fear of death. But when we think it's someone else's job to protect my life, then we're willing to give up life itself in order to protect this kind of false idol. And just the very dangerous road that's heading down. And to me, it seems like, again, there's maybe not, it's maybe not a coincidence that in this time where we seem to be going down that road of darkness, a lot of these plants are beginning to emerge. And it's tricky, I think, to speak in terms of, like, universal truth, and that, because I work with plants, I have some grasp on universal truth, and that's certainly not what I'm saying. But it does seem much like that Shipibo word of Hakun, that a lot of these plants are pointing towards universal truths, something that's beyond the known, something that's true beauty, that's pointing us towards joy, towards peace, and to experience death so that we can truly live, so that we're not living in that fear of avoidance, of that all of our actions must be to avoid death, which ultimately keeps us from truly flowing, dancing with life. And so I know that's kind of a long tangent, but it was something that connected us because of some of the things you were sharing. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, about kind of what you see humanity is moving towards in this time.
Yeah, interesting. I think some of the first thing that you learn in, especially work with ayahuasca, is that we come from a place where we think our thoughts are our own, that we have these thoughts that float around in our head, and they come from us, and we develop them, and we thought of them, and, like, they're unique to us. But you realize very quickly with working with ayahuasca, they're not from you. They were from your ancestors. They're from somebody who ushered something in your childhood. They're from the news. They're from the media. They've been implanted in you. Very, very few thoughts are your actual own thoughts. And so, we kind of lose our compass because we get kind of co-opted by various different ideologies, and we all need a higher power. Whether your higher power is the government, who you believe that they will tell you the right thing, it's the media who you believe that are telling the right thing, or it's your heart, and whether it's God. I think we've come to a place where we're getting our morals and our belief in reality spoon-fed to us at the moment, which is an extremely disturbing place to be, because it seems like anybody who dares to question an orthodoxy is shunned or called various names or dehumanized in some way. These are all mechanisms that have been used, obviously, throughout history and for a very long time. So I think that's a really dangerous precedent to be going down. And I think I just see those dynamics playing out more and more. And to be frank, I see at play somewhat of what I would call ideological possession, which is, these ideas which are not your own have been infiltrated so much that you are unable to see any other argument or any other form of logic or any other form of reasoning. For me, the highest principle must be life. And that's such a beautiful word, that hakun. If you listen to, some people may not like him, but I like him very much, is Jordan Peterson, who talks about, mythology and archetypes a lot and has a lot of wisdom, and I believe, and speaks to this idea of truth. And his interpretation of the idea of truth is that brings life, or that brings goodness, which is, almost identical to that idea of Hakun. And so if we are, that I think is the compass and the guide stick by which we should measure our ideas and our direction, is, does this bring more life? Does this bring more beauty? Does this bring more giving, more goodness? And I don't think we ask ourselves that, and we just blindly follow some dictates which are handed down, unfortunately. So I wasn't sure whether I was going to talk about this, but I've come to a few awakenings myself in this time, and really educated myself on the way in which financial institutions work, in which the web of money. And if you ever want to know how the world works, you just need to follow the money. I mean, if you look at any of the large let's just put it this way, any of the large institutions that are unelectedly giving advice these days, you will see a very clear web of interaction. Like, if you look at any of the board members from any of these large corporations, do the job yourself, go on the boards and look, and you will see that they are one and the same. And even if you go on Google, Yahoo Finance, and look up any of these organizations, whether they're news organizations, pharmaceutical organizations, whether they're military organizations, you will see the same shareholders there time and time again. So, it's not a conspiracy theory to say that you live inside a constructed box, whether you know that or whether you don't. The box is constructed by money. If at any point somebody says on the news for you to buy Tesla stock, that means the institutions are selling. If you look at any point on MSNBC and they tell you to sell Tesla, it's because the institutions are buying. The whole system is set up in order to protect the interests of institutions. If you think I'm a crazy person saying that, you haven't done enough research and you haven't looked at your sources enough. Highly controversial for me to say, but that is essentially the world we're living in. And so, yeah, these are four-sided rules that are developed, and they are put in front of you as shiny tidbits for you to follow and be guided by. But I would say that you shouldn't be getting your morals or your personal virtue compass from TikTok influencers, or from Facebook or CNN or Fox or BBC or anything, because you have a God-given right to connection, to this connection to nature, to this connection to the divine, to the connection to the ancestors, to the connection to your heart, to the connection to nature. And nobody can take that away from you. That is the position, that is your compass that you need to come from. If anyone, take your guidance from your own personal ancestors. How would your grandparents act? How would your great-grandparents feel in the current situation? How would they feel? How would they act? Like, take your inner guidance from your own inner guidance. It's so important. And just because I used to have these dreams when I was a kid about standing up in front of thousands of people who were telling me that I was incorrect, standing there and saying to them, no, I believe that I'm right. And there's been examples, many examples in history in which the majority have been clearly extremely, extremely wrong. And so the herd is not the right way to follow. The herd is certainly not the right way to follow. It's just a very dangerous time where we're being, where a lot of people are being completely dismissed, where literally entire, like 50% of entire nations are just being completely dismissed or told to be, whatever words you want to fill in the blank, various dehumanizing terms. And when you dehumanize an entire population of people, going back to the Bushmen that, go and listen to every single person's view, no matter how crazy, it doesn't matter if you think they're conspiracy theorists, it doesn't matter, you need to listen to them. Because if you don't, then we are in incredibly dark and dangerous territory. Because when you dehumanize entire populations, incredibly terrible things can happen, and incredibly terrible things have always happened. I had a teacher when I was at university who told me that the likes of the Holocaust could never possibly happen in time today. And that is an incredibly naive position to be in, because things do play out through history time and time again. And so we need to be very, very careful about the direction that we take things. So there's my little rant. But I think, just go inside yourself and go into your heart and follow your grandparents and follow Martin Luther King, follow, like great people of history, and follow their guidance. Let's not follow people on Facebook and quite frankly, we have some quite imbecilic leaders around the world right now, and I don't think it takes a conspiracy theorist to see that. Going deeper, it's again, if you want to know what's going on, just follow the money interest. It's not that this stuff is hidden. It's not. It's very clear and plain to see if you just do a little bit of research. But I think that's the issue. It's anything that is not spoon-fed to you by an authoritative force, a state-sponsored source, is considered crackpot. But you have to understand that these institutions are following the edicts of their funding partners, of their advertisers. They're not of their board members. They're not going to go against that. So I'm not telling you who they are. You can go and find that out for yourself. There's a cursory glance on Yahoo Finance, a cursory glance at their board members. It's very easy for you to do. So I'm not trying to prove anything to you. You can go and find that out for yourself. But I'm just trying to present to you a different way of looking at these institutions. We've come to a place where we never used to trust large institutions or corporate interests until now. We somehow see, Facebook and Twitter and these organizations somehow, virtuous protectors of truth. I don't know how we got to this place. It's a complete inversion of the previous liberal values. It's an incredible place to be, but that's where we are. So interesting.
For me, it seems, and I don't know if you'd agree, but again, as we were talking about with this plant work, again, one of the fundamental pillars is this idea of light and dark, and even things like dark magic. I think you alluded to this a little bit, but not that it's something to be avoided, but actually that it's something that we need to go into, because if we avoid it, then we never fully understand its power, and then we can be ruled by that power. These things that we consider even black magic, things like literally power, envy, greed, jealousy, lust, covetousness, these are things that in so many traditions, I mean, those probably sound more like Christian things of sin or darkness.
Yeah.
But even in things like Amazonian shamanism, those would also be things that are black magic. Those
Correct,
are things that have fame, money, all of these things. And they're very, very powerful. And I think that's why they're seen as black magic, because if we go down those routes, we can be easily overcome by those, because all of those things seemingly, as you said, even like with trees, there's a light and a dark side. Like money can have a light and a dark side, fame can have a light and a dark side, power can have a light and a dark side. But if we give into the dark side, then we're following that road of black magic, of being under the cloud,
Correct.
under the spell.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's why it's so important, I think, in this plant work to really understand those things and to go into them ourselves, to see them in ourselves. Because if we're not able to do that, then it's so easy, like again, these classic parables, like let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And we're so easy to judge or to point the finger, to say, well, this person is evil, while, as Jesus said, not seeing the speck in our neighbor's eye, in our brother's eye, but not seeing the log in our own. And unless we truly go into those things, as you mentioned, things like the Holocaust and Hitler, how did that ever happen? It seems like something very foreign. And yet, if we can't see that in ourselves, then those things become so much easier to happen, because we have these blinders on and we're not able to see how these things truly manifest in the world. And it seems to me like, for the people who are really willing to go deeply into this work, it was very, I think, very beautiful too. There's a samurai named Musashi, and he said, when you understand the way deeply in one thing, then you can see it broadly. And I think it's very similar when we can see these things inside of ourselves, and to battle with that, to go into it, to transmute it, to overcome it. Then we begin to see it in all things, and we can see it as it manifests outside. And there's this other beautiful quote, which I think is quite important in this time. And it's a very old saying, but I think Bruce Lee said it more recently. And he said, I would rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And also, like you were mentioning, Jordan Peterson, I think he says it very beautifully too. And again, I think people who find him controversial are, much as you said, people who have just been fed what the media is telling them about him, rather than actually listening to his own words. Because I think he's a beautiful human being, much like these people like Joseph Campbell, another beautiful human being who really has the ability to take these ancient myths and archetypes and really transmute them into like very this worldly kind of knowledge. And what does that mean? What were they pointing to? But he was saying that in the Bible, this idea that the meek shall inherit the earth, that for some reason that never really resonated with him. He's like, that doesn't seem to make sense. But it seems like when you begin to look at the deeper teaching of that, what was being pointed towards was this idea that it's not the meek or the weak who shall inherit the earth. It's the swordsmen, those who know how to wield the sword, but choose to sheath it. And I think that's a very powerful metaphor, because it, much like martial arts, very similar to how we were talking about in the beginning, it's like, in order to be peaceful, you have to know violence. In order to be a bearer of light, you have to understand darkness. And if we don't really begin to understand that, then those things become so easy to manifest in the world, because we don't understand the root of that. We don't understand how easily those things can be spread. And that's where I think so much of this work of, people like yourself, of others who have gone really deeply into this work, because it's a very common thing I see too. And I think there's a lot of fear of speaking up about what's going on in the world, which again comes from the ostracization, the censoring of knowledge. But the people who I've seen who've really gone deeply into this work seem to share like a very deep concern about what's happening in the world. They seem to be seeing a very common thread that's happening through censorship, through state-powered consolidation of power, through economic consolidation of power, through loss of liberty, through silencing people, and a very dangerous thing. And it's not inherently something I I see in again, people who just do plant work, because I think it's something very different if you go down and you do, one ayahuasca ceremony, and then all of a sudden you think you know everything. As we were saying, like the path of the curandero, it's a path of like, it's an arduous path, something that's very difficult. It requires a tremendous amount of suffering, of sacrifice. But I do think the other end of that is, can I be a bearer of light? Like, can I help the world? And I was speaking about this in one of the other podcasts. Like the true curandero, he's never someone who's just off in the woods by himself, because he's not able to affect change that way. Like, he has to be part of a community. She has to be part of a society to be able to bring that balance, to bring that harmony, to share that knowledge, to share that wisdom. So it's, again, maybe that's kind of a long rant, but it's definitely something I see very strongly, and something that I think we're headed in a very, very dark direction. And it's nice to see other people kind of taking a stand against that, because it can be very scary when, as you said, the majority, the herd, is against us, and putting these labels on, because it's so easy. Well, that person's bad, or they're evil, or they don't care about grandma, or they're a white supremacist, or they're a chauvinist. And it cuts, much like that word hakun, like it's against life. It's like, it doesn't allow life to fold, to grow, to evolve. Much like plants, it's like there's this amazing, intricate network that's happening, and all of these plants have the opportunity to grow, and they have an opportunity to learn from each other, to see, like, they're all trying to move towards the light, and eventually, like, they come to a balance based on that, on like what's mutually good. But it's not from suppressing or saying, well, this tree can't grow because it's inherently dark, or it's inherently evil. It's like, well, let's let it grow, and let's let it see. And so yeah, I guess that's my rant.
Well, no, we all get one. Yeah, it's necessary. Yeah, I think it is a difficult time to speak up, and obviously, we're ourselves dancing around these various subjects, and people will interpret that how they will. But I think I defined medicine, as that flourishing, beautiful aspect of life, of God's love. But to define dark magic, I would define it as that which separates you from that medicine, that separates you from that God's love, that separates you from your sovereignty as a human being, and your rightful place in the dominion of nature, and under God's in God's place, like under His care. You are separated, and this idea of boxes, again, you're almost like, I think I was saying this another day, I don't know if this is a great analogy, but essentially, I think what by taking away that position, you're putting people in a box, and every now and again you kind of feed them a banana, and they're sort of, thank you very much for this banana, that's very nice. But actually, unbeknownst to the person inside the box, the world is filled with an infinite amount of magical bananas. And so there is an infinite amount of abundance out there. And so, but you're just led to believe that you're inside this box, and the only giver of bananas is that this state, or this media representation that is the all-powerful. It is a disturbing place, and I would liken it to witchcraft. In fact, there's a shaman that I very much respect that said exactly that this energy that is percolating through the system right now indeed does feel like witchcraft, very palpably. And so how do we battle that? I think firstly we need to be brave, and we need to speak up. We need to speak up from our heart. We need to speak up and give light to that dynamic, because it is at play. There is a dynamic at play. And after we've done that, I think we need to paint a more beautiful picture. And what does that beautiful picture look like? I think we really need to get to a place really quickly that we need to get to a place like the Bushmen, where people listen to other people, where you see their humanity, no matter what political inclination they have, no matter what their belief in COVID is or the vaccine or whatever the hell it is, doesn't matter. No matter if they believe the earth is flat, whatever, you can't dismiss people just because they believe something that's crazy, that you think is completely crazy. It might be completely crazy. It doesn't matter. You need to listen to them because they are humans like you. You can't dismiss entire populations of people. They might not be crazy. I think a lot of conspiracy theories have been borne out to be true in the last year or two, and like nobody can deny that. A lot of things that people have said have been complete batshit crazy conspiracy theories have been borne out to be true, and anyone on any side can see that. And so those people might not be crazy. They might just have something meaningful to listen to. Maybe not everything, but maybe some things that they're saying are worth listening to. And so I think we need to get to a place where we can open-heartedly listen to all sides of any argument, just like the Bushmen do, in a fire circle, and come to the other side in a place where where everybody has a place. Everybody has a place, because we need to be able to live together, and we mustn't be swayed by people who have interests, whether that's financial, whether that's power, whether that's anything else. And do your own research on that, because I'm not prepared to go into that. But it's you need that compass to return to yourself, back to humanity, back to your heart. I think it's really, really important that we do that, and we do that quickly.
Yeah, it reminded me, people often send me messages, and especially recently in the last year and a half or so, about what the Shipibo see like in this worldwide situation, and I can never really answer that. I mean, one, because I'm not Shipibo. Two, it is a real group, but it's also a group comprised of individuals, and every individual has different views on things. But I have noticed more and more, speaking to some of the Shipibo healers who I have a lot of respect for, and it does seem that there's a common motif, which is this language of there's something very nefarious happening in the world, and they're not speaking about the virus. They're speaking about everything else that's happening around that. This climate of fear, even often using these words like diabolical. There's like a diabolical energy that's descending and trying to control and to dominate. And I think that's very interesting, because in a lot of ways, it's certainly changing, but a lot of these Shipibo still live in the forest and communities. They're not super in touch with like what's going on in the outside world and what are these things, but in the way that they describe it through their own personal experience and visions, to me, they seem to be describing things that I see maybe in a different way from just my own experiences, my own observations of this kind of very dark, diabolical quality that's beginning to happen. So if anyone is listening who has that question, what do the Shipibo see? That's also what I can relate. And with the caveat again that everyone's different, and certainly, I'm sure there's people who have different views on that as well.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's a very good point as well about individuality, that we need to see people's individuality again. I think we've been, for some reason in the last year or so, we've been very quick to divide people into groups, whether those are racial groups, sexual groups, political standing groups. This is not a good way to divide people. Everyone's an individual. I don't care what color you are, what political persuasion. There are, a million different views against different people. You can't categorize people in these swathing ways. It's incredibly dehumanizing. We've learned throughout history that putting people into tribal groups is not a great way to operate yourself, unless you want to sow division, unless you want to ostracize people from society. So that's what we're going through now. So I think an increasing amount of people are speaking up about it, which is incredibly important. there are, as I say, I won't go into this too much, but there are, incredible changes happening that you just need to open your eyes to in terms of the way financial institutions operate in the world. And there's an incredible consolidation of wealth happening, a transfer of wealth unlike we have never seen before. This is a grand theft on a scale like never seen in human history. And yet it's not being spoken about. The digitization of your being, your form of money, for instance, is a process which is happening very quickly. And again, anybody who thinks I'm a conspiracy theorist, you need to look on the Federal Reserve website, the central bank digital currency website. You need to look at the World Economic Forum website. You look at any of these websites and you will see that the plan is to digitize your ID and your form of money spending, and centralizing it into a central banking system. Now, why is that dangerous? It's dangerous because by all intents and purposes, you completely give up your freedom. Anybody who speaks out about against the government at that point can have their funds stopped, much in the way that China is currently doing with their social credit system. That is a reality which does exist today, and it exists in China. I happen to know a few things about that, having lived in China, and having many friends who live in China. So, I personally do not want to live in China, or abide by rules laid down by such an organization. Yeah.
and as you were saying also about this idea of division, I mean, those things seem like they shouldn't be very divisive. I mean, whether speaking from a more like American point of view, whether you're on the right, like a more libertarian, limited government perspective, like there's a very deep distrust of state power, of the need to control, of the war machine, of the distrust of financial institutions, centralization of money, centralization of power. That's a primary concern on the traditional left as well, is like the concern of power,
Correct.
The abuse of power, of beginning to divide people into class, and creating that warfare, and the continual centralization of power, of wealth, of control. And yet, as you were saying, it's a classic way of divide and conquer. You pit people against each other to where they see themselves as the enemy rather than the very thing that's happening. And for me, it hasn't been surprising, because these are things that I've seen happening for a long time. It's just in the current climate, I have been surprised with the speed and the worldwide, just the capacity that it's happening on a worldwide scale, like how quickly it's moving in that direction, and how little resistance there is to that. That to me has been quite surprising. And it's these things, like these liberties, which are so important. And it's something else I hear a lot in I think some people who are involved in this work, but involved more in an academic way. And I think they tend to bring a lot of those academic ideas to this work. But for me, one of the qualities of a lot of this work, a lot of these indigenous communities, there's a real aspect on personal power and personal freedom, of the ability to think, to have a direct communication with the divine. That, as you were saying, like with the Bushmen, like there's not inherently a leader with the, like I was speaking about the tubu, like when they sit in the circle, everyone has a role. There's not a hierarchy of like, well, this person is the ultimate leader and everyone has to do what they dictate. And if you don't, you're ostracized. Quite the opposite. Everyone is seen as having a power. Everyone is seen as having an inherent wisdom. Everyone is seen as having a role. And if those things aren't honored, then we move towards that ultimate dictate that centralization of power, of wealth, which for me is completely the antithesis of how nature works. Nature works in this unbelievable, complex, harmonious, absolutely decentralized system where everything is interconnected and woven and blooming and flowering and dying and birthing in this way that we have to try and understand that in any in any significant way. It's overwhelming, and I think that's one of the things that often these plants give us the ability to do, is to sit in that sense of awe, in that awe of creation and the unbelievably complexity of not just the earth or humans, but of life and of the universe. And to think that we have the power or the knowledge to try and dominate that or control it, or to set it up in a system where we know better, not only seems naive, it's ultimately very, very dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. So I mean, I pray for us. I'm sure we can. I mean, we've come this far, guys. So I think we can make it through. But all this talk of dark magic and these powers, or these these forces and these institutions. I mean, there's a reality to that, but the reality is only as strong as we let it be. Actually, we have all the sovereignty and all the power that we could ever want. Humanity is a collective force, that true social cohesion. If we say no, we are choosing our own direction, and we are sitting down as one tribe and listening to all of the voices, and we will not ostracize anyone. I'm seeing beautiful pictures from around the world of people holding hands and saying we will not be divided. This is the kind of path that we need to walk down. We will not be divided. Like, don't care who you are, don't care what conspiracy theory you're coming out with. I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to walk together into this new future together that we want to create, not that they want to create or somebody wants to create, that we want to create together.
Yeah, there's a beautiful tale that I've said a few times in this podcast, but this guy who I mentioned, Emika, and the Tubu, they have this beautiful story, and they call it the Diro Amasa. It's the children of the new dawn, and they say that like they knew, these were ancient tales, but they knew their time was going to come to an end. But they said that essentially, like every tribe, every group, every wisdom tradition had their power, had their knowledge. They were like the guardians of this very particular knowledge. But that we're entering a time of the Dirdo Amasa, where it's the children of the new dawn, of these children who don't necessarily see themselves as one particular lineage, but they're able to take the beauty, the knowledge, the wisdom of these different traditions, and as they say, to build a new Maloka, which is the traditional house, the house of worship, the house of ceremony, and a representation of the world, of the universe. So, literally to create a new earth, to create a new world based on the wisdom of bringing all of this knowledge together and really honoring what they would say are the four cardinal directions: the medicine of the north, the medicine of the west, the medicine of the east, the medicine of the south, and creating this new Maloka. And, I think much like you were saying, that's hopefully where we can begin to move, is in that aspect of creation, not destroying, not following the darkness, but following the light, like creation. Creation is life. That's and again, in any tradition you look at, that's the creation of life, is that creative aspect, that creative force. So, really embodying that and choosing in our actions and our thoughts how to be that creative force.
Absolutely. Let's all get together and build that Maloka. Let's do it.
Well, cool, brother. Well, we're a bit over 3 hours now.
Well, yeah. Wow. Woof.
Is there anything you'd like to touch on that we didn't get to?
I think I'd like to leave people with a quote. A quote by Marcus Aurelius. I like to say it to myself, when times are dark, when you can't see the wood for the trees. But it's true understanding is to see the events of life in this way. You are here for my benefit, though rumor paints you otherwise. And everything is turned to one's advantage when he greets a situation like this. You are the very thing I was looking for. Truly, whatever arises is the right material to bring about your growth and the growth of those around you. This, in a word, is art, and this art called life is a practice suitable to both men and gods. Blessings upon blessings. What then could be strange or arduous when all of life is here to greet you like an old and faithful friend?
Beautiful, my friend. Well, that seems like a good place to leave it. And
Lovely.
And it's been a pleasure having you on, man. Thanks for sharing your story and your wisdom. And that's really what this podcast was about, to give people like you a platform to create that new earth and to bring, as we said, old friends together, even if not in form, but in soul, and to connect and to grow. So I wish you all the best, man. And I have a feeling like we'll be keeping in touch more, and I hope our paths cross one of these days in the not too distant future. And I'll give Marav a big hug for you, and I wish you all the best, man. Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure to be on a podcast and to have the time to be able to tell my story and have that listened to with an open heart. And I hope everyone received something from this podcast. And guys, let's build that Maleka together, like you say. If anyone wants to reach out to me, you can just hit me up. I've got a very small Facebook page called Wati Wara, WATIWARA. If you want to just touch base, you can do that. But till then, nice to speak to you, mate, and I'm sure we'll see each other in person soon enough.
Yeah, maybe just actually before we head out, so if people want to reach out to you, they can do that, and maybe if you can just tell the audience what you're doing now, like what work you offer, or if people are interested in contacting you, how that would work, and what they can expect.
Yeah, sure. So I have a small Facebook page which is very unkept. Which is just Wati Wara, WATIWARA, which is a name I was given by some Aboriginal healers, which just means big man. Don't know if you can tell on the podcast, but I'm about 6'6". So I mean, I do diets for people. I provide build that connection with people so they can diet with British trees, and build that connection with the land here. Also do some healing work with people, and that might encompass different things. So work with tobacco, or work with acupuncture, or massage, or any of the other modalities that I've learned through time. So it's work that I love to do. If anyone wants to reach out to me, is interested in that, just let me know. So.
And you're based in England?
Yeah, I'm based in England, in London. So that's where I am.
Great. Well, thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to when we connect again.
Thanks, mate. No, good speaking to you. Ta-da. Bye.
All right, everybody, that is it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. For me, it was really a pleasure to sit down and talk with Ben. We covered a real range of topics, and it was a fascinating conversation for me. I learned a lot about him and just his path, and kind of reflecting ideas back off someone is always a really fascinating thing for me. So I hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you all for tuning in. As always, if you're able to support the podcast, that's a really big help to me. Patreon is a really good option. For as little as $1 a month, you can sign up. There's different tiers you sign up for, and it gives you back some really nice things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. So that's a really big help to continue to bring on these guests. To all the people who have done that, to all of the patrons, thank you very much. I really appreciate all of your help and support. And if you're able to do that, thank you in advance, because that's a really big help. There's also the option to direct donate via PayPal. I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. Also now with YouTube, there's the option to join the channel. There should be a little join button if you're looking at it on a computer, and that gives a lot of the same perks as the Patreon page. If you're not able to do that, As always, subscribing to the show is a really big help on the YouTube page. Subscribing, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, that's a really big help. And then if you're listening on the audio version, going on Apple Podcasts or whatever format you are listening on, subscribing to the show with Apple Podcasts, leaving a starred rating and a short review, that's also a really big help to getting this show out to a bigger audience. I have some good guests coming up. I'm interviewing my friend Kunti, who she works with temazcal, or sweat lodges, a traditional Mexican practice. She also works with 5-MeO-DMT, the bufo frog. I have my friend Paulette coming on. She has a bunch of different backgrounds, and I'll be also speaking with my friend Ido coming up. We did an interview with him and Diana in one of the previous episodes. This one will just be with him. And I believe a couple other guests coming up, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope everyone is doing well, and I will see you all on the next episode.